We are watching you.
There is an indefinable, mysterious power that pervades everything. I feel it, though I do not see it. It is this unseen power which makes itself felt and yet defies all proof, because it is so unlike all that I perceive through my senses. It transcends the senses, but it is possible to reason out the existence of God to a limited extent. Even in ordinary affairs, we know that people do not know who rules or why and how he rules.
We are watching you. We are watching you.
So space, night, death, darkness, not being there, is an essential component of being there. You don't have the one without the other. That's the way being is made up.
We are watching you.
And good morning, everyone. Or good now, whatever your now is. It could be some other time. I suppose now is the closest thing to anything we can get. Good now, everyone. So we're gonna try for some Frederik Pohl today. I can't guarantee it's gonna be any good. I ate some of my nose and stuff. I had coffee, so I'm full of phlegm. So of course this should turn out perfectly, right? Actually, I have to step away for a moment. I'll be right back. You guys enjoy the rest of the music. Okay, now I'm back. Sorry about that. I had a couple of wayward things that I had to deal with, but I've returned. Okay, this should be bright enough in here for me to attempt to read. I guess I could turn on the overhead, but I'm being lazy and I don't care that much.
You hear music.
Yes.
What you really hear when you hear melody is the interval between one tone and another. The steps, as it were, on the scale. It's the interval. So in the same way, in the intervals between this year's leaves, last year's leaves,
We are
this generation of people and that generation,
watching you.
the interval is in some ways just as important.
Sorry, I'm looking at the book here. I'm trying to remember where we were.
Than what it's between.
uh, Okay, I don't remember where we were exactly, so I'm gonna back up a little bit. Okay, we're gonna back up a little bit because I guess I'd read ahead a little bit and I can't, not privately or anything. I can't remember where we were. I remember the last conversation we had, and that was about it. So we're gonna go ahead and get over onto it, or over into it, or over about it, I guess at some point. And before we do, I want to go ahead and let you guys know that today's music is, of course, brought to you by the internet. That's right, it's the internet that brings you today's music, not what you'd normally find, just the regular old-fashioned howdy-doody internet doing its internet-y type things. As for me, play game. I don't know if it'll pop up or not. It probably won't capture. Looks like it's not yet. Alright. Which means I have to return this back on. Let's see. Turn off Viscera. I should have TFTD in here somewhere. QRST, maybe? No. Which one was I doing? Oh shoot. Maybe it's just desktop. Oh well, I just have to add it. One moment, guys. It was in there. It's not now, but it was in there before. Tales from the Dark. I don't know if it's gonna show or not. We'll find out. URST UV WXYZ G shy. Okay, it's being a jerk. Cool. One day I'll figure it out. Maybe it was Subnautica. Subnautica likes to capture everything. Subnautica the one doing it? Hey, Subnautica, knew it. Loves to capture everything. Subnautica's like, I'm going to capture everything. I don't care. Look, we have fire. Fire good. Fire your friend. Do not fear fire. Fire loves you. It wants to give you a hug. Is that why they call it a warm embrace? Alright, that up already. Anywho, so from what I can remember from the last place we left off, Victor and Risa had been unfrozen in the future. Everyone they knew was dead, and their life kind of sucked balls. Until a big old fat lady decided that she wanted to blow up another planet. So she's gonna build a spaceship, or refit a spaceship, to go and blow up another planet, because she dumb. And so it got them out of their work details, and then they're talking to a guy called Mirian, and Mirian's the one who saved them, and Mirian's all butthurt about it, because apparently his job sucks now, and the world has been split up into factions. These factions are, they're not political, they're, religious. And so the different factions are constantly trying to kill each other. And they're all underground in ice, so they're all trapped in ice tunnels trying to kill each other. That makes perfect sense when there's no place to flee, but that's Frederik for you. So what I did is I backed it up a little bit, like I said. And so the last conversation that they had is Mirian was trying to explain to them that he knows very little about making space weapons. They know very little about making space weapons, but they can make rockets if they build all the right parts and pieces. In a place where they literally say the height of, or what would be considered a weapon of mass destruction in this place is literally a hand grenade. So, you know, their biggest weapons are hand grenades, and they're trying to make rockets they can use to bombard a planet. For reasons far beyond my understanding. This people is dumb. Anyway. So, the last conversation we had is at least Teresa said practically we can see if it's possible at all, and Miriam states it has to be, meaning to build the rockets and get them all armed and crowd. But is it a holy hand grenade? I should hope to think so. I'm sure it was blessed before it was thrown. Victor's doubts did not diminish as the days went on. He had a very clear memory of the jolting blows Ark had suffered. The idea of taking on that sort of technology with the improvised firecracker rockets Miriam was trying to build was ludicrous. Now and then, in the privacy of pillow talk with his wife, Victor expressed his doubts. The rest of the time, he kept his mouth shut. Yet, grudgingly, he admitted to himself that whatever these people lacked in wisdom or manners, they made up in courage. Nothing was easy for them. Even food was so scarce that the storehouses were tiny. Food didn't need to be stored for long when Sunday's harvest was Wednesday's memory. The 2,350 inhabitants of the 4 colonies lived on a marginal 2,200 calories a day. Yet that added up to 5 million calories that had to be supplied each day. So many kilograms of chicken, frogs, rabbits, and fish, so many metric tons of grains, tubers, and pulses, so many cubic meters of leafy vegetables and fruits. The vegetables were not very leafy, nor were the fruits the handsome, unblemished objects Victor remembered from his childhood supermarkets. But there was just so much you could do about growing things in caverns under the ice. Victor's shit detail, mushroom farm, had supplied only a tiny fraction of that everyday crush of provender, but every tiny fraction was urgently needed. The alternative was overload, and if overload wasn't checked, the next step was starvation. Still, they had managed to refurbish an old chemical rocket and send it clear to Nibu's orbit, board old Ark, and get it going again. The old interstellar ship had been at the aphelion of its stretched-out orbit of the time. They had not risked coming close to the faceless enemy on Nibu, yet they had stolen old Ark away from him, whoever he was. Victor disliked these people very much. All the same, there was a faint touch of admiration coloring his contempt. Even Miriam turned out to be quite human as they worked together. The man was a lot younger than Victor had thought. Miriam was only 39 in New Manhome years, at that, the equivalent of an earthly college kid. That surprised Victor. He seemed much too young to have volunteered for the mission to Nibu. Yet it also turned out that Miriam was married and had even left a child behind when he took off for the long mission. These sentences are getting away from me. Apologies. It's probably because there's a burp and it's trying to escape, and it's harder to read and not burp at the same time. But of course I volunteered, Victor, he explained. The grades were pretty close to overload, and when I got caught in what? Victor asked, guessing that the girl had turned up pregnant and Miriam had had to marry, but it wasn't that. Marion looked shamefaced, picking at his beard. They charged me with theft, said I'd eaten some of the community's honey. Well, I did, he conceded, but it was only a few drips and a broken comb. It probably would have been just wasted otherwise, so they said they wouldn't prosecute if I volunteered for Nebu duty. He looked around apprehensively and lowered his voice. It was Tortise, honey, he whispered. She was the one who said I had to choose between the ship or the freezer. Tortise seems to have a lot of authority, Victor commented. You'd better say that. She's, well, listen, how old do you think she is? Victor shrugged. Maybe 120? New man-home years, of course, and none of these people had ever encountered anything else. Try 75, Miriam chortled, enjoying Victor's astonishment. Why, the woman was Risa's age. That's right, she could still be having babies, except her husband's in the freezer. He worked there, and they caught him making a fire to keep warm. So she just eats instead of, being with a man. And, he stopped, looking suddenly frightened. Oh, I thought I heard her coming, he said. Listen, we'd better get back to work. Now we've got these fuel canisters, and we can use them for the body of the rockets. Read plus burp equals burp. Well, whatever the word happened to be when it comes out, it'll sound like a burp. And I'm not doing my ABCs. The people on New Manholm had a fair supply of explosives. They needed them now and then. When the ice moved, as it unpredictably did, glacier lips had to be blasted to keep them from burying what was left of Homeport too deep to survive. But explosives were too dangerous to be freely available. Half a dozen little wars amongst the sects had proved that. The explosives plant was located 3 kilometers away, heavily guarded by a fully armed squad from each of the sects, and the shuttle that would someday take people back up to Ark and Mayflower was within its perimeter, guarded just as heavily. Victor eagerly accepted the chance to go outside to visit the launch site. It was the Peeps' day off, so Risa was obliged to stay idle with the others in the Warrens of the People's Republic, but Victor and 3 others, one from each but the Peeps sect, struggled into each. Okay, I'm done. I keep saying the word each every time I see the word E. Or the letter E. You can't even say the word E. Damn it! One from each of the People's sects. See again, each but the Peeps sect struggled into extra layers of clothing topped with sheepskin. Thank you. An electrically warmed mesh covering his mouth and nose, and a visor was over his eyes. Even so, that first Arctic Plus blast that struck him soaked through the furs and the 4 layers of garments in moments, leaving him shaking as he toiled after the other 4 to the place where stronger, colder men were tanking up the ladder shuttle with liquid oxygen and alcohol. Okay, yeah, now I understand why those sentences got away from me. He kept adding in words where there wasn't supposed to be words for the cadence. When you are writing a sentence that has 1 word, do not add a second word. It gets confusing. Squirrel for too much prime sub. Thank you, Squirrel, for the prime sub. I don't know if it'll yell at us. I mean, it should. But thank you again. At least the winds were only winds. They did not drive blizzards of snow against the struggling men and women. Winds couldn't do that. Snow itself never fell anymore. The air of New Manholm had been squeezed, skin cracking dry, for there was no longer any warm oceans anywhere on the planet to steam water vapor into the air so that it could come down somewhere else as rain or snow. There wasn't any somewhere. Literally, he said any somewhere. Not anywhere, literally any somewhere. And you wonder why I can't read this. There wasn't any somewhere else when the whole planet was frozen over. What? When? Or where? What? This sentence. Okay, tell me this sentence makes sense in English. There wasn't any somewhere else when the whole planet was frozen over. Okay, there needs to be a comma or something there. I now get it because I read it slowly. It should have been there wasn't any somewhere else now that the whole planet was frozen over. God, he's an idiot. No English sense was made. I know, right? Sometimes I think that Fred got high. I mean, like, totally blasted out of his mind high, and then he just started, like, free writing. And that's why his sentence come out sounding like a hippie puking up a cat. Squinting against the blast, Victor could see the dark, cold sky. It was not anything like the skies he had known before. The shrunken sun gave little heat. Even the dozen stars that were left were themselves, Victor was almost sure, dimmer than they had been. And then, as New Manholm turned, Red Nurgle appeared, as bloodily scarlet bright as ever. Minutes later, that great puzzle, the universe, burst eye-blindingly white over the horizon. Victor gazed at it and sighed. If only his father had lived to see. If only these people were willing to try to understand. If only... He felt Marion tapping him on the shoulder. Victor looked where the younger man was pointing, up towards the same eastern horizon. Yes, the universe, Victor said eagerly through the mesh. I've been thinking. Marion looked suddenly fearful. Hey, not that, he cried over the sound of the wind. Please don't talk about that. I meant over there, next to it. Squinting through the mesh, Victor saw what Marion was calling his attention to. It was a faint spot of light, barely visible as it moved down towards its setting arc in slow orbit, moving towards its final rendezvous with Mayflower. Victor stared at it. The time was getting close, when Ark and Mayflower were linked together and the lander would be launched, and then it would all start. He was suddenly coldly certain that Tortee was going to order him onto the shuttle, and he didn't want to go. How does the sentence not make sense? I mean, the question of going somewhere else was posed in the character's mind outside the reader's view. No, it may have been because I stuttered, but literally when you read the sentence on its own, it's because I think it's the all-encompassing nature of the words. There wasn't any, meaning any. Somewhere else is not. Somewhere else is considered a thing, but somewhere else is encompassing of all places. So when you encompass all places into a single thing, there wasn't any somewhere else. Like if you would have put somewhere else in quotes, that would have made more sense reading it. But it was literally, the sentence literally says there wasn't any somewhere else when the whole planet was frozen over. Somewhere else wasn't in quotes. So when you read it like you're supposed to read it without that pause of a quote, or the idea that a quoted thing is a thing, not a collection of things, but a thing that you're referring to. Saying there wasn't anything, it's a double negative, or a double positive, or two groups of two things. You're just saying any. It is literally, he just chose two ways of saying any. Because he could have just said there wasn't somewhere else when the whole planet was frozen over. That makes sense. If he would have said there wasn't any, and then in quotes put somewhere else when the whole world was frozen over, that would have made sense. But there is no indication that any and somewhere else are two separate things. So yeah, so literally it would have been made just as much sense if he would have said there wasn't any. Annie, are you okay? Are you okay, Annie? Really, squirrel? So anyway, but again, I'm starting out. My nose is stuffy. It's me being me. So you guys just have to give me a break. I'm not the best of the readers. Yeah, my fan is now on, so if you can hear it in the background, I don't care. I am overheating already. Oh yeah, and that's the other thing that makes me mad about Victor. If you remember, Victor doesn't know how to keep his mouth shut. Victor does not know how to stop talking about things. Like 4 groups of religious like psychopaths who are murdering each other over the color of the snow tell him, don't talk about the universe, and he keeps pointing. But the universe! I want to learn about the universe! Tell me about the universe! Stop talking about the universe. I like the universe! Let's talk about that! And it's just like, oh my god, I'm going to kill this guy. You were the chosen one, Annie! I know, right? Oot. So let us continue. When they were back in the dining hall again, Marion was charged up with optimism. We're going to do it, he told Victor positively. We've got crews trained for repair already. They'll be ready to take off for the Ark in a couple of weeks, and then, Victor said, as gentle as possible, we have to hope that they can get the ship habitable again, and that these rockets will work, and that little bit of antimatter left in Ark's drives will hold out long enough to ferry people back and forth. Marion paused, a spoonful of stew of corn and beans halfway into his mouth. Don't talk like that, Victor, he begged. Victor shrugged and remembered to smile. He was beginning to thaw out after his long run outside, and even the meatless day stew tasted good. The important thing, he told himself, wasn't that this harebrained project should work. It was only that people could believe that it might. Even a false hope was better than no hope at all. I do wish, he said, that we had some more antimatter. We could do a lot with more power. Even maybe build some lasers or something better than... He stopped himself from saying what he had been about to say about the feeble rockets Marion was putting together. It was pretty nice when we had Earth technology going for us, he said wistfully. Is it true that you people actually made this antimatter stuff, Marion asked previously? Not me, not here, but back on Earth, sure. They made all kinds of things, Marion. Way back on Earth. Marion wasn't the only one listening as Victor reminisced about the wonders of the planet he had left as a child. A woman across the table put in, you mean you just walked around outside without even any clothes on? And things just grew out in the open? It was like that here on New Manhome, too, Victor reassured her. And they didn't worry about... She paused, looking around and lowered her voice. Like, overload? Victor gave her a superior smile. He knew he was rubbing salt in wounds, but he couldn't help it. If you mean killing people because there were too many to feed, no, not ever. In fact, they wanted more people. Everybody was supposed to have all the children they could. Risa and I had 4, he boasted, unwilling to try the explanation of what was meant by Risa and I, and the divided parentage of the children. The children. Victor lost the thread of what he was saying. Suddenly, the cooling stew and the smells of the densely packed dining hall stopped being pleasant. The children! And he would never see any of them again. Victor excused himself and stumbled away to the Jakes. He didn't have to urinate. He just didn't want anyone to see, in case he had to cry. See, I don't get that. I know I'm kind of slated in that regard, but his children grew up, they lived a life, they were fine. They grew up, they lived, they had kids. Some of the people around him are kids of those kids. They had a life. They didn't die yesterday of getting hit by a car. They grew up, grew old, and died. How is that sad? Victor's just such a whiny brat. He's a vessel for my emotions. Well, I don't have any of those. Moving on. When he got back, Miriam gave him a quick, hooded look and went on talking about the experiences as a freezer guard. They've got all kinds of stuff in there, he was saying. You wouldn't believe all of it. There's one whole chamber that's full of frozen sperm and ova, animals that they brought from Earth and never started up here. Whales, termites, chimpanzees. What's a termite? The woman across the table asked, but she was looking at Victor. Victor did his best. It's a kind of insect, I think. They used to worry about them eating the wood in their houses in California. And a chimpanzee's like a monkey, I think. He added honestly, because all he remembered of chimpanzees was that he had seen a lot of almost human-looking primates one day at the San Diego Zoo, and he had been more impressed by the terrible way they smelled than by his father's lectures on which was which. Sad because he didn't see them grow? Ugh. Because a parent isn't supposed to outlive their children? Not in normal circumstances, but when you're frozen for 200 years, that kind of goes out the window. You've lived longer than your children's children. At that point, it becomes moot. There was silence for a moment. Then Miriam put in, "We saw Ark when we were outside, only it was near the fireball, so we couldn't get a really good look at it." Victor saw that everyone looked a little embarrassed when Miriam mentioned the fireball, yet the man had brought it up. It was as good a chance as any to probe. "About the fireball," he began, because he's a complete and utter moron who can't figure out cues when it comes to conversations. Conversation stopped. Everyone's eyes were on him, and every mouth was closed. Even Miriam was looking suspiciously at him. The hell with him, Victor thought. "I know what the fireball is," he announced. "It's a foreshortened view of the universe. However, or somehow, I don't know how, we've been accelerated so fast that we're catching up with all the light from everywhere." Silence. No response at all. Then Miriam swallowed and said, "Maybe we should be getting back to work, Victor." But the woman across the table reached out to touch his arm. "What are you telling us, Victor?" she asked. "How could that happen?" "I don't have the faintest idea," he said bitterly. "Something is pulling us, or pushing us, maybe. I don't know any forces that could do that. Anyway, our planet, and the sun, and all the other planets around it, and a few of the stars are all being pulled along very fast by something." "What do you mean, something? Do you mean by God?" the woman asked, crossing herself. Freddie didn't say anything about that. "No, not God," Victor said hastily. "It doesn't have anything to do with God, of course. It's some natural force, probably, or, well," he stopped, angry at these people and even more at himself. He hadn't stopped in time. "Are you saying that the great transporter isn't God?" the woman demanded. An old man down the table stood up, and his white mustache quivering. "I don't like this kind of talk," he announced. "I'm going back to work." And Miriam, glowering as he led Victor away from the table, warned, "You have to watch what you say, man. I'm as tolerant as the next fellow, you know that. But you don't want a charge of heresy and corruption of faith, do you?" This day, Victor thought gloomily, was not going well at all. It did not occur to him that it was capable of getting a lot worse. Because he keeps talking about the big fireball in the sky that no one wants to talk about. I swear to God, he's like a guy in Utah asking all the Mormons about their sex life. Just not getting, you don't do that. Kid's about as thick as a damn rock. I think this is why this is the reason I really don't like this section. It's not because of the people's ignorance. It's not because of their lives. It's because it's what they've come to know. It's their existence. They're not happy, but they're doing the best they can. They've come up with some rules and some regulations and some things that keep their lives going. They have become religious, and so what? It's because Victor keeps coming in, and he's stupid. And he keeps opening his mouth, and you just want to beat him to death with a stick. Like, Victor, read the damn room. Understand that this conversation, this thread of talk is not welcome here. Why can you not figure that out? And he's just like, I like giant fireball. Woo! But, again, you just want to smack him around a little bit. Be like, Victor, the hell? He was hunched over the keyboard when Tortille came back to her room. He cleared the screen quickly, but not quickly enough. She had caught a glimpse of the spectral analysis display. What's that, Victor? She demanded ominously. Have you finished the repair plans? Almost done, Tortille, he said with his false smile, keeping his anger inside. I'll have them for you this afternoon. I want them now. I've got a meeting with the 4-Power Repair Committee, and I need to show them what has to be done to the Ark. Whatever you've been doing? No. She said forcefully as he opened his mouth, I want to know what you were really doing. Show me that screen again. But really, Tortille began, and then knew it was no use. Suddenly he keyed in the file name and watched as the damning spectrum flashed on the board. The old woman might have been a religious bigot, but she was not a scientific fool. She recognized the patterns at once. You're checking spectra, she announced, and I can guess what that's a spectrum of. Victor, I don't know what to do with you. You've been openly talking religious error. He started to speak again, startled, but she overrode him. Don't deny it. Do you think people don't report to me? 6 people heard you in the dining hall today, and you're wasting working time with your immoral habits. I can't put up with this. Do you have anything to say for yourself? I'm only trying to find out the truth about what's going on, Victor cried hotly, because he's an idiot and thinks that science will somehow save you when you're starving because there's not enough food to eat. Well, science will save you because you're starving, but not the science he's doing, okay? Figuring out how to make beets grow better in snow will save you. Figuring out why there's a big white blotch in the sky will not save you. They don't cross-reference. It's not going to happen. Even without the religious don't look at the big bright thing in the sky part. He's a drunk fat quarterback that's not in a party anymore, still thinks he is. Yeah, he's exactly that. The truth, Tortille said icily, has long since been revealed to us. Blessed Freddy set it down for all to see in his 3rd testament, and that's the only truth that matters. I forbid you ever to speak of the subject again. You know, if he wanted to get points with them, he should let them know that he knew Freddy, that he babysat Freddy, that he'd knocked Freddy's teeth in once for sleeping with his wife. But hey, you know... You notice how... That's the thing, is they keep mentioning Freddy's name, and not once does Victor ever click the fact that the Freddy they're talking about is the Freddy he grew up with. He's like, I know that guy. I mean, I know that guy. I knew that guy. I grew up with that guy. He slept with my wife. I mean, he was supposed to, but he slept with my wife. Anyway, moving on. I forbid you ever to speak of this subject again. He was astonished to see that she was really angry. Her pudgy face was squeezed into a scowl. Don't try my patience too far, Victor. I don't want to have to punish you. You wouldn't like it. She stared at him for a moment, then added as an afterthought, You can forget about using my room for your personal pleasure again, too. Now get out of here. You and Miriam are wanted at the shuttle. They're almost ready to fuel up for the first repair crew. Not only did she take away his computer privileges, she took away his vagina privileges, too. See? You should have shut up about the big bright thing in the sky. Now you're not getting sex. Can't read the room, can you, Victor? Just don't know how. It could have been worse, Victor thought shortly. Risa was right. He had gone further with Tortille, well, with all of these superstition-ridden, mule-stubborn people, than was sensible. For that matter, sending him out to the freezer complex was punishment in itself. It was late. There was little chance they would be able to get back before dark, and no one wanted to be outside when even the feeble heat of the sun and starburst were gone. Marion did his best to hurry the workers at the liquid gas plant along. It wasn't hard to do, because the fuel detail wanted to be back by nightfall, too. Working at top speed, he and Victor checked the fuel manifest, inspected the tank's seals, and agreed that it was all in order. But the haste was all in vain, because they were shunted over to the cryonics caves to wait. Their 4-power escort hadn't shown up on time. Oh, hell, Marion groaned, pulling unhappily at his beard. We'll never get back before dark. I'm sorry, Marion, Victor said. I think I got Tortilla mad at me. You think you did? Oh, Victor, just shut up. Every time you open your mouth, you make more trouble. And he slumped down against the wall and closed his eyes, refusing to speak. Absently, Victor strolled around the chilly cave, glancing at the tunnels that led off from the central chamber. Inside each tunnel was row on row of capsules. Each one held a human body, convicted criminals mostly, with crosses for the greats and the reforms, crescents for the Muslims, and five-pointed stars for the peeps. Those are the fruits of overload, Victor knew, and dourly thought that the chances were good that he would be joining them if he didn't learn to keep his mouth shut. By the time the escorts arrived, Victor had made up his mind. He would never say a blasphemous word again. He would follow Risa's example. He would do his best to please Tortilla and to make her hopeless plan work. He couldn't wait to see Risa to tell her about his resolve. It was almost dark by the time the two of them and their escort were stumbling through the freezing gale back to the dwelling tunnels. The fireball universe had already set, and the sun was nearly at the horizon. It was definitely getting too cold to be out of doors. Miriam glanced at Victor, then made a gesture of reconciliation. He pointed to the horizon. There was Mayflower, a handspan north of the setting sun. The old ship was just beginning to climb up the sky from the west in its 100-minute orbit, with Ark still out of sight below and behind it. Marion put his head next to Victor's and bawled over the noise of the wind. It won't be so bad, Victor. Once they get the repairs going, Tortilla will be easier to get along with. You'll see. I hope so, Victor shouted back, and bent his head, squinting against the cold as he trudged along. Easier to get along with. That wouldn't be hard, he thought resentfully. He slipped on a slanting block of ice, cursed, and caught himself, and heard a strange moaning sound from Miriam. Victor looked up quickly. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught a quick flicker of light. Startled, he stared up. It was Mayflower, suddenly shining bright, almost as suddenly darkening again. What is it, Miriam? He cried. But Miriam didn't know. No one knew, until they had toiled back inside the tunnels again, and the word from Tortilla's instruments had spread like wildfire. The sudden brightening of Mayflower had been only reflected light from another hidden source, and that source, it had been the worst disaster imaginable. Ark had blown up. Dun dun dun! Sabotage! I need light. I'm going to stand up for a moment. I will keep my headset on so you guys can hear me fumble with this stupid thing. I think part of the reason I can't read is because it's too dark in here. So I'm opening up the windows a little bit. It's actually overcast today. Oh, that's nice. It's still going to be warm as all hell out there, but at least it's overcast. For the time being, it probably won't last. This is light! Exactly! Victor, shut up! Ah, light! I can see the words on the page again! Oh, how wonderful. All the ones on the left side are blurry, though, but I'll work with that. I need glasses really bad. Okay, so I apologize that I've been stumbling through this as badly as I have been. I'm going to try my best not to do that. I should not lean forward quite as much as I do. I'm going to lean back a little bit for you guys, see if that helps. There, that helps. It helps me. I don't know about you, but I'm helped at least. Fortunately for the people of New Manholm, Ark had still been below the horizon when it happened. It wasn't a chemical explosion that had blasted the old ship into ions, not even a nuke. It was the annihilation of matter and antimatter, pounds of mass converted into energy in the twinkling of an eye, in accordance with the old formula E=mc². That hemisphere directly under Ark had received a sudden flood of radiation like an instant flare from the heart of a sun. There was nothing living on that part of New Manholm. That was fortunate. For, of course, anything that had been alive in the face of that terrible blast would have stopped living at once. The skeleton crew on Mayflower were less fortunate. Even through the thick skin of the spaceship, they had received more radiation than the human body was meant to experience in a lifetime. And Tortilla was weeping hysterically in her room. She refused to see Victor at all. She let Miriam in for only a moment, and when he came out, he was looking very grave. It's over, Miriam told Victor mournfully. If we don't have Ark, we don't have a working drive. We can't build a rocket ship big enough to attack the planet. No, of course not, Victor agreed, dazed, wishing Risa were there. What happened? Who knows, Marion said despondently. Tortilla thinks it was the peeps. She thinks they were so set on getting microwave power that they started fooling around with the drive to keep us from using it again, you know? And it just went off. He stopped for a moment, gazing at Victor with an ambiguous expression. Then he said, I've been thinking, Victor. You've had a pretty good run for your money. Victor blinked, not seeing the connection. I have? I mean, Marion explained. You were born on Earth? Good, Freddy. Victor, that makes you just about the oldest person in the world. Sorry, Good Freddy is like their way of saying God, and I read it wrong. I guess it does, Victor said grudgingly. That was an interesting thought, but not the kind that reconciled you to anything. So when the council decides, Marion left it hanging there. Victor looked at it in puzzlement. What is there to decide? You said yourself the project's over. I don't mean the project, I mean about you, Victor. Tortilla won't stand up for you anymore. Not after this. Not after, well, you know, he said awkwardly. We're always pressed for living space here. What are you talking about? Victor demanded, losing patience. Are you saying I have to go live with the peeps or something like Risa? Oh no, not the peeps. And I suppose they might keep Risa on, but you, Victor, well, he said fairly, it's not like death. We don't kill people. That's against the commandments, and who knows? Somebody, sometime. Well, there's always a chance that somebody, someday, someone will thaw you out of the freezer. Because he wouldn't keep his mouth shut, and then the rocket blew up. Bam! Bad timing for you, Victor. So he gets to go in the lockup, and Risa's gonna die without him. It's gonna make him sad. So now he gets to leave Risa. Okay, finally, the crappiest chapter of the book is over. Now we can move on to cooler stuff that comes later, like our mom. Ah, Wan Tu. Back to him. By the time Wan Tu had worn out his 100th star, he began to get uneasy again. It wasn't that he was fearing attack from his long-gone siblings, for that had not happened in many hundreds of billions of years. He certainly wasn't worrying about the matter creatures, his long-forgotten matter copy number 5 had reported. No, what was bothering Wan Tu was that he couldn't help noticing that his neighborhood was going downhill. It was no longer a prime, desirable place to be. Most of the stars in his galaxy, in this galaxy of his, were aging, and everything was getting rather shabby. Of course, with 400 billion stars to choose from, he wasn't really out of living space. There were even a few late-generation stars of his favorite kind, type G, like Earth's long-gone sun. But for Wan Tu's taste in stars was very like that of the human race in many ways. When the one he was in was showing signs of bloat, since he definitely didn't want to sit through the transformation to Red Giant again, he picked out the best of the available Gs and made the move. His latest home was a G0, a good, clean star. It was brighter and bigger than most, though Wan Tu found after he had moved in that it had a faintly annoying taste of metals, naturally enough since it had been formed out of gas clouds that had already been through a star or two. Little annoyances like that weren't really important, but the star wasn't ideal either, and Wan Tu didn't see why he should be uncomfortable in his own home. He thought about alternatives. He always had the option of moving into a different stellar type, of course, say an elderly K or even a little red M. He knew M's well. That was the kind of star in which Wan Tu, long since, had installed his childish companions. He had certainly done that for the children's own good, because those stars were really long-lived and stable. But it was also, to be perfectly truthful, partly for Wan Tu's own sake, because those smaller stars gave the children less energy to support their constant babble. That was what was wrong with the long-lived stars right there. They had less energy. That ruled them out for Wan Tu. He couldn't see why he should cut back on his own lifestyle, no matter what. But he could see, not very far ahead, a time when there just wouldn't be any new G-type stars left. After some thought, the solution occurred to Wan Tu. It was simple enough once he had thought of it. If this galaxy, and most of the others, had grown past the age of frequent star formation by natural processes, why should that be a problem? There was always Wan Tu with his mastery of unnatural processes to help things along. So he found a nice clean gas cloud out in the galactic halo and set to work. It was simple enough. All he had to do was prod at it with a flux of gravitons, graviphotons, and graviscalars, judiciously applied in all the right places to speed its condensation. Then he blew up a few heavy stars nearby, timing their rhythmic pulses to encourage some of the gas cloud material to fall together in stars. He knew exactly what to do. After all, he had seen it happen often enough over the last billions of years. Once he got a density wave going with a radioactive shock compression factor of 100 to 1 or so, the gas clouds couldn't help becoming stars. True, it takes them millions of years for them to settle down, but he had lots of time. True, he had to deplete the energies of many thousands of otherwise healthy nearby stars to get the process going, but what were a few thousand unimportant stars to Wan Tu? And now I'm going to kill a fan because I'm cold. Whatever else he did, Wan Tu was always careful to keep an eye on the galaxy he had left behind, the old Milky Way, which he had fled when it turned into a battleground. He wondered if any of his colleagues had survived. He had spotted the star he had escaped from early in his observations. It had been no more than a ruin by then, its greenish planetary nebula and already breaking up into wisps of meaningless gas, its helium-burning shell detached from the carbon and oxygen core, the core itself now no more than a white dwarf with a density of tons per cubic inch. It looked like an abandoned home, and it was. No one could possibly have moved into that after he left. Wantu was sure. Pretty sure. But he kept an eye on it, and on all the other stars that he suspected might once have sheltered one of his kind. They were all ruins now, too. Possibly his siblings had all killed each other off. Possibly Mrom had been the last there was, and Wantu needn't have run away after all. Possibly wasn't good enough. Whatever else Wantu did, he was never going back to that galaxy. But was that enough? Was staying away from the competitors he knew about going to keep him safe from possible unknown others? Wantu wasn't a bit sure of that. It struck him as a wonder that he had never met another like himself, apart from the copies he had made. That seemed statistically improbable to him. In this old universe, how could he be the only one, if natural forces had accidentally brought his unfortunate progenitor to life way back in the universe's infancy, when it was no more than 4 or 5 billion years old? Imagine! Didn't it stand to reason that the accident might have been repeated somewhere since then? But no other ever showed up, and on balance, that was fine with Wantu. Wantu had pretty much accepted the fact that he would be alone for he had so many damn useless words, all of that remaining long eternity that stretched ahead, not counting, of course, the sweet but boring babble of the children. He didn't like the loneliness, though. He wished he were wise enough to create equals who could not ever become competitors. He was almost sure that there ought to be a way to do it, but he didn't know the way, and he refused to take the chance. Of course, it never occurred to Wantu that these solid matter pests who kept developing every few 100 million years or so could be company. They were simply too far beneath him. Imagine a human being buddying up with a spirochete. Excuse me. That one was hard to say. I thought he made up a word. I'm like, what is it? Oh, it's a spirochete. Boop. They were interesting after a fashion. It entertained Wantu to see how matter life kept trying to amount to something, eon after eon, on this planet or that. After the first few, he had learned that the things usually started as organisms. That was not his word, of course, but the concept he had in mind was of creatures that metabolized oxygen and were composed largely of complex carbon compounds, which is pretty much the same thing. Lots of planets developed organisms, but only a few permitted their organic life to reach the stage of being able to interfere with the physical world. Sometimes the amusing little things did that very well. Sometimes they did it almost as well as Wantu himself, for quite often they learned such skills as how to fission uranium and fuse hydrogen. And they very often, sooner or later, managed to build strange little metallic shells in which they ventured into space. A few exceptional races even succeeded in taming the subatomic particles Wantu himself employed, neutrinos and quarks and gravascalars. But none of them went beyond that, and none of them stayed at that point. To Wantu's surprise, they seemed to be a self-limiting phenomenon. Wantu didn't realize that at first, so the first half-dozen times an organic race got that far, Wantu simply gathered his forces and obliterated them. People, planets, stars, and all. Then he got more curious, and thus more daring. He withheld his hand for a while to see what would happen, of course always poised to destroy them the moment they became a threat, or even became aware of his existence. What he discovered, perplexingly, was that point never came. That was a strange and somewhat repellent thing about these little solid matter creatures. Not long after they became able to wield sufficient forces, they invariably used them to destroy themselves. Wantu thought wryly that they weren't much smarter than his own kind. Not as smart, in fact, for of Wantu's kind, at least Wantu himself had managed to stay alive, while of all the matter creatures he had ever heard of or encountered, every one, he thought, was long since extinct. In this, of course, he was quite wrong. The doppel called 5 could have corrected Wantu if there had been any way left for 5 to reach his master. The doppel was no longer entirely sure that it wanted to reach Wantu anymore, because it wasn't sure that Wantu would approve of what it had done. 5 hadn't disobeyed any orders, but it had taken the liberty of trying to guess what Wantu's orders would have been if Wantu had thought to give them, and so after a long, long time pushing ever nearer to the speed of light, it had reversed the thrust of its impellers. 5, along with all its flock of stars and orbiting bodies, was slowing down. That was very daring of 5, and 5 knew it. Of course, it took as long to slow down as it did to accelerate to that all but light velocity in the first place. 5 had plenty of time to reconsider its rash action. But 5 wasn't built that way. It was built to do only what its master wanted, or what it thought 1-2 wanted. In that long deceleration, 5 was aware of the activities of the matter creatures that had attacked it, or that it had attacked. Whichever way one chose to look at it. The things were quiet enough for a while. Then 5 noticed that they were putting artifacts into space again. None of the things came very near Nibu, so it didn't have to take any action. Actually, it saw with interest most of the artifacts seemed to head out further into the solar system. That was fine with 5. Let them do what they liked around the brown dwarf as long as they didn't come near Nibu. And then, when the deceleration had slowed enough so that the great light flare that had been all the light of the universe should have resolved itself into a surrounding sphere of stars and galaxies again, it didn't. 5 was filled with what a human would have described as terror. Things were not the way they should be. The universe had become very strange. The Doppel thought long and hard and saw only one way out for this. First, it summoned up all its strength to create a flood of low-energy, high-velocity tachyons, and impressed on them a message, key to 1-2's own preferred tachyon band. It shut down almost all its equipment to divert the energies left into broadcasting that message over and over. The 5 had no idea whether 1-2 would ever receive the last somber message. It was not even sure that 1-2 still existed anywhere, and certainly 5 didn't have even a hint of a clue as to where that anywhere in the sudden immensely scattered universe might be. Then 5 did the only thing left for it to do. If 5 could not serve 1-2, there was no reason for it to exist any longer. Maybe, even if it had served 1-2 badly, as it feared, it no longer deserved to exist. So when all its accumulated energy had been used up and its last message had gone out, 5, in its equivalent of an agony of shame, performed its equivalent of a ritual suicide. It shut itself off. Oh no! Matter Doppler number 5, why? Number 5 is no longer alive. Lol. Hey, chapter 20, we now get to talk to Victor again, because Victor is Frederik Pohl for stupid. Chapter 20. I have an itch on my arm. That's not chapter 20, that's just me talking. Victor knew he was waking up when he discovered that he was dreaming. There are no dreams in the brain of a corpsicle. What he was dreaming was about flying, and about pain. The pain was very definite and unpleasant. It was not a nice dream, and he was glad, though very fuzzy in his mind, when he woke up. Victor was aware that he was definitely awake then, because when he tried to open his eyes, they were stuck. He had to strain to squint out of them. "Mom?" he asked of the thin, amused woman who was leaning over him. "Mom, are you there yet?" Sorry, we there yet? He realized right away that that was foolish of him. The woman definitely wasn't his mother, wasn't anything like his mother, really. She was very tall and painfully thin, and she had great round eyes. Victor saw the eyes quite clearly, although he was having some annoying trouble in seeing anything else. His own eyes did not seem to want to focus clearly, and his head hurt like hell. The woman turned and said something quick, liquid, and murmurous. It was not in any language Victor knew, although parts of it came close to making sense. His English might have sounded perhaps if it had been cooed by pigeons. She was speaking to someone Victor could not see very well. Then she reached down and touched the side of Victor's head as though pointing something out to the unseen person. It was probably a gentle touch, but it didn't feel that way. It told Victor right away his dream of pain had not been entirely a dream. The woman's touch exploded through his head like a hammer blow, dizzying him. He jerked away from that probing finger and found that the dream of flying was not altogether an illusion either. He moved so easily with so little force dragging at his body that he knew that he couldn't be on New Manhome. In fact, he couldn't be on any planet at all. He didn't weigh enough. Victor let himself fall gently back, hazily pondering the problem. The woman and the other person, a man's voice, not so much cooing as harshly gargling the sounds, were carrying on a conversation in the language that Victor could not quite comprehend. If he wasn't on a planet, he thought, he was probably on a ship. What ship? Not Ark, certainly. There was nothing left of Ark but droplets of condensed metal, if any of Ark was left at all. Not old Mayflower either, he was sure of that. There was nothing on Mayflower like this amber-walled room with its soft clouds of pastel light drifting across the ceiling. Some things looked somewhat familiar. The thing he was lying on, for instance. It was very much like the shallow pan that the corpuscles were thawed in, and he caught a quick glimpse of several others like it in the room. They were occupied. There was a human body in each, and warming radiation flooding down on them. He was not the only person brought back to life, he thought, pleased with his cleverness at observing that. But where was all this happening? And what was hurting him so much? As the explosion of pain in his skull dwindled again, he became aware of 2 other hurting places, a mean, burning sensation in his right leg below the knee, and a sharper, smaller, but still very painful hurt in his buttock. None of it made any sense to Victor. Nothing else did either. Sense was beyond him. He was dazed, confused, disoriented, and he was even having trouble remembering. On all the evidence, he was quite sure that he had just been thawed out from a time in the freezer. But he remembered, or thought he remembered, that he had been frozen before, more than once. He thought, and which time was this? He reasoned that it couldn't have been the times when he was facing a long interstellar flight, because he had been a child then. He wasn't a child anymore, of course, was he? And who was this woman, who was now coaxing him to lie down again? The name Risa crossed his foggy mind, and he didn't think this woman was she, whoever Risa was. He shook his head to try to dispel the confusion. That turned out to be a bad mistake. The pain burst through him again. But he felt the need to demonstrate his wakeful competence at once, like someone waked in the middle of the night by the telephone who instantly protests he wasn't asleep. He licked his lips, getting ready to speak. "I don't feel very well," he said, forming the sentence with care. Funnily, the words didn't come out right. It was more like an animal growl than a voice. He discovered that his throat, too, was extraordinarily sore. The woman looked amused again and gestured to the man with her in the room. The man, Victor saw, was quite normal-looking, neither as wrathfully thin nor as tall, but he wore what the woman wore, a sort of gossamer gown. He turned out to be quite strong. He pushed Victor back down, holding him so that the woman could do something to him again. The woman leaned close to Victor. With her came a fragrance half like flowers, half like distant wood smoke. Her nearness made Victor suddenly aware that he was quite naked. The woman didn't seem to notice, or at least to care. She peered into his eyes. She touched the base of his throat with an instrument that glittered like metal, but was soft and warm to the touch, while she studied a tiny dancing firework display of color at the instrument's base. As she pulled down his lower lip, instinctively he tried to twist his head away. Again that explosion of pain. But the man in the filmy gown gripped his head roughly, holding it immobile, while the woman touched the damp, tender insides of Victor's lips with some other kind of thing, and Victor went quickly and helplessly to sleep. She gave him lidocaine. Night-night. She made his mouth numb, and it made his tongue stick out. When he woke up again, he was alone in the room. Even the other resuscitation pans were empty. His head still hurt, but the other pains were gone. Well, not gone entirely, but now there were only little annoyances rather than agony. When he sat up, he saw that his right calf from knee to ankle was encased in some sort of pale pink sausage-like contrivance. He puzzled over that for a while, poking at it with a finger. He didn't understand it. He didn't understand much of anything at all. Everything seemed so complicated. The way he felt, he thought, was almost like being drunk. He tried to recollect how he had got there. There was a memory of being told he had to go back in the freezer. Yes, that was true. He was pretty sure. It wasn't a comforting thought, though. He had a vague memory about freezing, something that someone had told him. Was her name Wanda? Long before. It did not do to be frozen too many times. That he was sure of, though what it meant was very unclear. Sorry, I have to sniffle. Nose. Why is it on reading days my nostrils get all plugged, my sinuses get all plugged up? Only on reading days do my sinuses get plugged up. Every other day I'm fine. But on reading days my nostrils flare. It's got to be because I'm reading. It's got to be like a nervous thing. Sorry. Anyway, now that I'm done complaining. He heard a man's voice growling something from the doorway, and when he looked around it was the fellow in the gown looking at him. "You're awake," the man said, wondering wonderfully in the words that Victor understood. "Stay there. I'll see if Nerina wants to talk at you. Excuse me, wants to look at you." She could talk at me too. I like words.
We are watching you.
Thank you for hosts. Victor made himself sit up. At least some questions were beginning to be clear. For some reason, these people had decided to revive him from cryonic suspension. All right, he can understand that. He wondered how long he had been in the freezer this time. It couldn't be a matter of centuries again, of course. He simply would not accept that. But it had been long enough, at least, for the reforms, or whoever's turn it was at the power plant detail this time, to get a little decent heat in the freezatorium. But hadn't he just decided he wasn't in the freezatorium anymore? He wasn't sure. And if these people actually were reforms, or if they were any other sect from the Frozen New Man home for that matter, they'd certainly change their mode of dress. The man was taking off the filmy robe, and under it he wore nothing but a kind of kilt. Then, when the impossibly thin woman came back, Victor observed that the gown she was wearing was the kind of clothing one wore for decoration or for modesty. Well, no, not for modesty either, he thought, but certainly not for keeping out the cold. The thing was a long white smock, almost transparent. He could clearly see that there was nothing much under it. The woman looked different, though. She seemed to be more fretful and tired than when he had first seen her, as though she had been working hard and the silky gossamer gown was soiled with new spots of blood. When he shifted position to look at her, he thought to look down at himself and was suddenly ashamed of his nakedness. Then, twisting for a better look, he saw that there was a wound on his right buttock. That was where one of the pains he had almost forgotten had come from. It wasn't an insect bite, but a sort of stab wound in the flesh. Someone had put some soft, rubbery film over it, transparent, almost invisible. The film peeled away easily when he poked at it, and under the dressing the wound was still oozing blood. The skinny woman pushed his hand away, clucking reprovingly at him. The man came over and firmly pressed the padding back in place. "Damn it, leave it alone, can't you?" he said irritably. "Now sit still. Narina's got to examine you to see if there's any more freezer burns, so you just let her do it, all right? I've got to check on the others." Victor puzzled earnestly over all of that. He understood all the words, though they had a strange quality, as though they had come from afar. But whatever was wrong with Victor's head kept him from putting them together to make any kind of coherent sense. "Freezer burn," Victor began, but the man was already gone. Lacking any better alternatives that he could see, Victor did as he was told. He let the woman peer into his eyes, touch him in all sorts of personal places with her skinny instruments, with their rainbow lights, lift up a corner of the pale pink sausage on his leg and peer under it, and finally replace it, looking satisfied. She patted his head, so gently this time that it didn't send him into a blaze of new pain. Then she beckoned him to follow her. He tried. He did his best, but his best wasn't very good. The right side of his head felt numb, and his right leg wouldn't support him, even in the astonishingly light gravity of the place they were in. She had to let him lean on her as they walked. It was more like gliding in a dream, like getting about in a spaceship under microdrive, through an amber-walled corridor to their first stop. I swear, I'm not this bad at reading. These sentences are put together like he put them into a jumble machine and then spit them out on a page. There are literally, like, that sentence had 2 hyphens in it for absolutely no reason. Why are there hyphens in this sentence? There's nothing needs to be hyphenated. Fred, there are some sentences, some paragraphs, some chapters where Fred does fine. This is not one of them. Monkey type book good. Yes, monkey type book good. The first stop was a tiny room containing an amber glassy bowl in which water gently whirled. Victor identified it easily enough. A toilet. Vomit in that. Victor had not forgotten that he was quite naked, though the woman didn't seem interested in that fact. Neither did she watch him while embarrassed he relieved himself, nor on the other hand did she especially look away. The second stop was a shower. He looked at it doubtfully. He wasn't sure how to make it work, and he wasn't sure he could stand alone in it. When he tried it, the leg, at least, was feeling stronger. The woman turned the shower on for him. He limped inside, bracing himself against the soft, shiny wall of the cubicle. As the gentle, warm cascade began to pour over him, it was so relaxing that he found that he was actually enjoying it. When Victor came out of the shower, the woman handed him a round, soft towel for drying himself. "Thank you," he said, hoarsely rubbing his face. The woman looked pleased, as though at a dog that had given an appreciative woof. But when he pointed at the dressings on the leg, Nope, no leg, just on leg and hip. There's no him or his. I shall hyphenate all the things. But when he pointed at the dressings on leg and hip, trying to ask if they had been harmed by the shower, she only shrugged, either uncomprehending or just not interested in his question. The third stop they made was stranger and a lot less pleasant. The woman abandoned him in another room, to the care of a different man. This one was almost as skinny as herself, though he did have some strangely knotted muscles, whereas the woman's calves were like pencils and she had no visible biceps at all. The man gestured Victor to a seat in something that looked like a dentist's chair. Shatner, all the things. When Victor sat down as ordered, the arms of the thing quite suddenly swung out and wrapped themselves around him. He couldn't move. At the same time, something else slipped around his head and gripped it as in a vice. It wasn't painful, but it wasn't irresistible either. Then the man approached Victor with a different kind of glittery instrument. He touched it to Victor's forehead. The metallic thing wasn't soft at all. It bit into the flesh of Victor's forehead and stung like a wasp. "They're draining his thoughts." Victor shouted in surprise and tried to struggle. That was no use. He was held fast. When the man took the instrument away, the spot itched terribly, like a bee sting. But then the man sprayed the spot where he had been working with a different kind of metallic thing. The itching stopped at once, and the man touched something that caused the chair to release Victor. That ruled out the cloudy theory Victor had just begun to formulate provisionally, that these people had thawed him out for the purpose of a little recreational torture. Then the man led him, stepping in long, gentle, high-rising paces, to another chamber, where he showed Victor inside and closed the door behind him. Victor looked around him. He was in a room with a number of flimsy-looking chairs, perhaps a waiting room, and a kind of glass-topped desk, but it showed no other signs of being an office. Glassware and some metallic things sat under a mirror that was set against one wall, but it wasn't, as far as Victor could decide, a laboratory. He was not alone in it. 3 other men, as naked as Victor himself, were sitting uneasily in the frail chairs, talking to each other in worried low tones. One of the men was black, one short and pale. The third was also pale but taller than Victor and hugely built. And all 3 had the human-scale bodily form Victor was used to, not the famine-victim limbs and structure of the woman who had thawed him out. As Victor came in, all 3 of the men looked quickly up at him with a fearful sort of suspicion in their eyes. Then their expressions cleared quickly as though they had recognized him. Well, they couldn't have, Victor knew that. He was quite sure they were all total strangers to him. But then he saw that each of them bore a bright blue device tattooed on their foreheads, and in the wall mirror he caught a glimpse of the same design on his own. It was an elliptical border enclosing some hen scratches that might have been numbers or words. It was that tattoo that they had recognized. They all wore the same brand, so they were all the same boat, whatever that boat was. The tall man got up, offering a hand to shake. "Welcome to the party," he said, in the quick, rough English of the quarreling sex of frozen new man-home. "What did you get the freeze for?" Victor puzzled over the meaning of what the man had just said to him, rubbing the mark on his forehead absently. When he had put it together through the cloud that seemed to pervade his mind, he rehearsed for a moment and managed a full sentence. "They just didn't like me," he croaked. "Mary," the black one said, "when did they start doing it for that? I got my own freeze in 386. At least, I had a trial. They said it was for unauthorized parenting. Well, it was just her word against mine, but what could I do? Jaron here was frozen for drunkenness, and Mescro got it for thievery." The short, pale man cut in, scowling. "Watch your mouth, Corelto. I didn't steal anything. I just made a mistake and went through the meal line twice. It could have happened to anybody when they were on overload." "Does it matter?" The black man smiled. "Only it looks to me as though things must have got really bad by the time they froze you, It took Victor a moment to realize he was being asked his name. "Victor," he got out. The black man, Corelto, looked at him searchingly, then glanced at his companions. "Are you all right?" he asked. "He's a dummy," the short one, named Mescro, declared. "Ah, no," the big one said. He looked down at the floor, as though abashed at his own temerity in trying to contradict the other. "He's just, mixed up." He looked up appealingly at Victor, then at the doorway. "Isn't that true, Minette?" he asked. The man who had been in the thawing-out room stood there, gazing at them without pleasure. "No, Jaron, he's a dummy, all right," Minette confirmed. "Narina says he's got a freezer burn. Looks like it got his leg and his brain. But he'll do for what Narina wants him for." There was a satisfied, challenging look on his face that made the black man ask worryingly, "What's that, Minette?" "That's what you're about to find out, guys," Minette said, with the pleasure of an old hand breaking in the new recruits. "It's time for you to pay for your thawing out." "Pay how?" the little thief named Mescro demanded. "And what's going on, anyway?" Minette pursed his lips thoughtfully. "Well, I'm willing to clue you in first," he said, hiking himself up one of the benches to lecture. "Only don't interrupt, because you've got to earn your pay in a few minutes. Narina's waiting for the stuff. Let's see. My name's Minette. I told you that. I'm your boss. That's the most important thing you have to remember. It means you do everything I tell you. Understand that? You'll be seeing a lot of me for a while. The next thing, probably you'll want to know the date. All right. It's 44th of summer in the year 4241 AL. There were gasps at that. Victor was only one of the ones gasping, but Minette quelled it with a frown and went on. "Next, what's going to happen to you? Nothing bad. You'll be all right. Don't worry about that. You'll stay here for a few days, as long as Narina wants you. You'll have to start learning the language while you're here, but that's pretty easy. You'll see. then you'll go to live in another habitat, probably. I don't know which one. Hey, Corelto interrupted. Hold on a minute. What's a habitat? You want him for Snoo Snoo? Possibly. Minette gave him a mean look. Didn't I tell you not to interrupt? This is a habitat. What you're living in now. Anyway, what happens when you leave here, I don't exactly know. I've never been on any habitat but this one, but Decaduck, literally his name, Decaduck, bunch of quacker, and Rena say you'll be okay. You might as well believe them. You don't have any other choice, do you? Anyway, right after you do what you're here for, we'll get something to eat, and then I'll have more time, alright? Now, he said, standing up, it's time to earn your pay. So you get up, all of you, and go over there and take one of those specimen bottles each, and then what you do, you each jack off into it. And be sure you don't spill a drop. Yeah, she wants them for Snoo Snoo, but not the right kind, not the fun kind. They want the Duck a Duck, yeah. She wants them for the tubular kind of Snoo Snoo. The boring Snoo Snoo. The pre-processed tubular Snoo Snoo. Gross. If I ever get frozen, brought back to life in the future, and they need Snoo Snoo, damn it, I'm doing it the classic way. I don't care how gross she thinks it is. Sandra Bullock can shut up. Yes, actual touching, swapping of bodily fluid. Ew, gross. The fuzziness in Victor's brain wasn't altogether a disadvantage right then, he thought. The thing he was told to do was degrading, and it made him feel ashamed and angry. If he had felt really sober, he would have been twice as humiliated at what he was made to do. The fluid's enough to fun. I know, right? But he did it. So did all three of the others, as startled as Victor at the bizarre orders. They grumbled and tried to joke while they did it, but the jokes were resentful and nobody laughed. Victor was still trying to sort out the dreamy maze in his mind. There were so many questions. It was hard even to form them, but some stood out. For one, what was freezer burn? Victor knew he'd heard the words before, and he knew they meant something bad. He just didn't know what. He knew that he could have asked the others, but he wasn't ready to do that. Wasn't ready to hear the answer, perhaps. Then there was that other big question. When Minette told him the date, was he joking? It couldn't really be nearly 4,000 years since he'd last been alive, could it? He cursed the fogginess in his brain again. He wanted to think. There were things he had forgotten, and he wanted them back. The things he did remember were fragmentary and unsatisfying. They weren't pleasing either. He did remember cloudily waking up from a different freezing. Had it been an old Ark? He did remember the old interstellar ship Ark, though the memory was peculiarly fragmentary. It was almost as though there had been two different ships. That time it had been a terrible shock, to have learned that everyone he had known was 400-year New Manhome years dead, and had been numbing. But at least then he had recognized the sensation. He had known that he felt numb. To find out that another 4,000 years nearly had passed while he was laying as a lump of dreamless and unfeeling ice, why, it felt like nothing at all. He didn't feel pain. He didn't even feel the numbness. He didn't feel at all. When they had embarrassedly made their donations of sperm, the trustee named Minette. I'm going to call him Minette. It's probably Manet. It's Mannett, but I'm going to call him Minette because I'm American and we pronounce all the letters. If you're going to use them, you're going to pronounce them. Sorry. Minette showed them to their quarters. Food was waiting for them. Fresh fruits and things like meat patties. And things like little cakes. And things Victor could hardly recognize at all. Some cold, some hot, some tasting nasty to his untrained palate. You're on your own time now, Minette announced. You have to start learning to talk to these people pretty soon, but right now all you have to do is eat. A tall man named Jareen cleared his throat and whispered apologetically, "Do we get paid for this?" Paid? Holy Freddy, man. Oh god, Freddy's still here. 4,000 years and Freddy's still here. At least he'd be proud to know that 4,000 years after he died, they're still spewing his name all over the place. What about solder? Most don't pronounce the L. Yeah, you do. It's just combined with the O. Solder is different than sod. Or sawdust. Solder. It changes the way the O is pronounced. I don't know. I'm just saying. It's different. Same thing with soldier, I guess. Soldier. The L's in there. You can hear it. Don't you think you got paid already just by being taken out of the freezer? Then Minette paused to think it over. Actually, that's a tough question, he admitted. I can't say I exactly understand the money system here, but there is one, I guess. No, you don't get paid. Whatever it costs for your food and all that probably gets charged to Narina's laboratory somehow. If you want anything else, forget it. You can't afford it. Mescro picked up his ears. What can't we afford, he asked. Different things, Minette said, scowling. Don't bother me with that kind of stuff now. Now you all look like you've got enough jism stored up to squeeze out a sample 4 or 5 times a day, Narina, so we're going to do you one more time before you go to sleep. But for right now, you better get started learning the language. Wait a minute, Coralto objected. We haven't even finished eating yet. Well, snap it up, Minette growled. But he was enjoying his role as mentor and straw boss, and when they insisted on asking him more questions, endless questions, through mouths stuffed with food, he tolerantly gave them answers. Victor wasn't one of the questioners. He ate in silence, trying to follow what was being said, missing most of it. Could it really be true that his brain had been damaged by freezer burn? It was certainly that something had happened. The talk rolled over him, too fast to follow, too hard to understand. Then a familiar word caught his attention, the black man, Coralto, asking, Where are we? It isn't New Manhome, is it? Hell no, I told you that. It's a habitat. You mean on another planet? Maybe Nibu? Minette gave him an incredulous stare. Nibu? Don't you know what it's like on Nibu? We never go near Nibu. It's hot as hell and people get hurt there. Victor frowned, puzzled. He had been close enough to Nibu to know that it couldn't be called hot anymore. Not after the weakening of the sun's output. Still, he supposed in comparison with the systems frozen over other planets. But Minette wasn't waiting for the next question. You want to know where we are? He asked. I'll show you. He got up from the table and walked over to one of those glass-topped things that looked like desks. Come on over, he called, scowling over a thing like a keypad in one corner of it. Just a minute. They were all clustered around it as Minette hit a key. The glass turned misty, then cleared again. There's old Nergal, Minette said, proud of his success in getting the thing to work. Victor yelped. So did the other three. They were looking straight down onto something immense and redly glowing like a bed of mottled coals. Victor couldn't help himself. He reached out blindly and caught the arm of the big man named Jaren. Jaren was shaking too, but he held on to Victor as they all stared down. Victor felt himself falling into the glowing hell. No, not falling exactly. What he felt was that ruddy Nergal was swimming up toward him, drowning him. Minette's voice came to him from far away. That's what they call the brown dwarf. They moved here while the sun was cold, and were living in a habitat around it. A habitat is kind of like a big spaceship, you know? Only it doesn't go anywhere. It just stays in orbit. That's where everybody's been living for the last few thousand years, when it was so cold before the old sun came back. The sun came back? One of the others cried out, astonished, but Victor hardly heard. He was staring down, transfixed. He knew, part of him knew, that he wasn't really being swallowed by that glowing pyre. It was, he told himself, only part of the freezer burn. The numbness in his head that was like a gauze scrim slipped between himself and the world, but he couldn't feel himself swaying. Sorry, could feel himself swaying. Again, my nose is stuffy. I hate this. Yeah, silly. What could you possibly want right now? It is 11, okay? It is 11. You are, by the gods, 3 hours early. Kisses. Now leave. Where is it going? Sorry. Hey, hear Jaren's worried voice say, something's wrong with this guy. Minette's face appeared before Victor. He looked disgusted. You're relapsing, he accused. You better go to bed. Victor tried to focus on him and failed. All right, Daddy, Victor said. See, at least Victor's now not getting in trouble anymore. He is unfortunately disabled. He is mentally transfixed on a time called stupid. You know, if only he'd been freezer burned the last time, that would have worked for him. And you know why? Because he wouldn't have gone and opened his damn mouth all those times, said all those things, and gotten himself freezed because he was a dummy. Now he's an actual dummy. He has the dumb. He does. He caught it, now it's inside him and it won't leave. When he woke again, his throat felt less like sandpaper, but his other parts were worse. Nor was his mind much clearer. He had a confused memory of being wakened in order to masturbate again into one of the soft, crystalline plastic vials, and of men's voices around him when he slept, but it was all hopelessly cloudy. The voices were still going on. He lay trying to follow what they were talking about with his eyes closed. Minette's voice drowned out the others. He was saying smugly, You know what they want. They want you to drug off into bottles. That's why they brought you up here, for sperm. It's like crossbreeding animals, you know? They've been out here for thousands of years and they want to get some lost genes back into the pool. Oh, it isn't just you guys. There are a couple dozen of us real men around in one habitat or another that they've thawed out already, not counting the stiffs. There's maybe 100 of those stashed away in Rena's cryonics place, waiting until she needs them. Is that where we were? Somebody asked. In the freezer? Of course that's where you were. Where else? Rena thaws out a few guys at a time for samples, and mostly they get sent away when she's through with them. But I stay here. I'm the only one in this habitat permanently. Rena kept me to help her out, you know? Victor heard a leering, sycophantic chuckle from one of the others. It sounded like Mescro. The Manette's voice picked up again. They collect a batch of corpuscles from the freezers in New Manhome and bring them here. Marina takes cell samples from each, then she thaws out the ones that look interesting. You know, that jab on your asses? Victor remembered the bandage clearly enough. Well, that's where she gouged out a piece to get a DNA sample. I don't remember that part, one of the others objected. Jaren, Victor thought. Of course not. How could you? You were frozen. That's why it made such a big hole. Manette pulled down the waistband of his skirt to display the spot on his own hip where only a puckered little dimple still showed. Don't worry, it heals up. Then after she checks the sample out, if your genes look interesting, she thaws you out and turns you over to me. Is that why they tattooed us, to show we're like gene donors? Carolto asked. Manette laughed. You think they need a tattoo to show that? Don't you see what they look like? Skinny as skeletons. No, they could tell that much just by looking at us. That mark? He said, sounding prideful. It's kind of like a warning, you know? It tells all the women that we're still potent sperm donors. All the other males around here have that stuff turned off as soon as their balls start working. They can make love, all right, believe me. It's one of their favorite things, but they don't produce sperm. The women don't want to get pregnant, you know? But if they don't get pregnant, then how? You mean babies? Sure, they have babies. Only they do it in a test tube, like. That's what Narina does in her laboratory. They match up the sperm and the ovum in a kind of incubator, and they carry it to term. When the baby's ready, they pull it out and put it in a nursery. Listen, these people don't do anything that hurts, or even makes them sweat, except for fun, he added, grinning. Don't worry about it. If they ever decide they've got enough of your DNA, they'll fix you too. And then they'll take the mark off your forehead, and you can plow right in. Jaren, who was somewhat slow of thought, had just got to the question that interested him. Wait a minute, he said. Are you saying that, some of these women might want to... Manette looked smug. What happened, he announced. Even the cute one that thought us out? Excuse me, has happened. I don't know why I thought that word said what. Maybe I got freezer burn. I got Frederik Pohl burn is what I got. Manette scowled. Never mind about her, he said darkly. Change the subject. Sure, Manette, Mescro said, grinning. Only I noticed you don't have the tattoo anymore, and I was just wondering. I said change the subject, Manette roared. And then as he saw Victor trying to sit up, he said, Oh, look, Sleeping Beauty's awake. What do you want, Victor? Well, Victor said, trying to get the words out, in spite of the sudden, almost breathless feeling that had hit him. Is it all men? I mean, if these people are so hungry for different genetic traits, don't they thaw out women too? Hell no! Why would they do that? They don't really use the sperm, It's just easy for them to work with. So they just extract the gene fragments they want, then they mix them up with other strains to get the kind of genes they need for whatever they need them for, anyway. That's not my department. Narina's told me all about that, but I guess I didn't listen. Anyway, that, he said, preening himself, is one way we have an advantage over the women. We guys can produce 1 million sperms a day. Women can maybe do 1 ovum a month, if they're lucky. So if they want genes from a female, they just do it the hard way, from tissue samples. He peered in a friendly manner at Victor, who wasn't smiling. What's the matter? You afraid you can't make your 1 million a day? Victor shook himself. No, nothing, he said. But it hadn't really been nothing. It had been a quick flare-up of unexpected and quite unjustified hope, quickly belighted. No, there was no point in hoping along those lines, because that one little corner of his mind had suddenly come clear, like the desk that had shown him Nergal, and he had remembered Risa. Death by crushed pelvis! Death by snoo-snoo! Without the babies! Yeah, babies suck! I hate kids. I hate babies. I hate people talking about babies. I hate listening to people talk about how long they were in labor. I hate them talking about how they're pregnant again. I hate them talking about how they want to have another kid. I hate kids. I hate kids. I hate kids. And by extension, I hate parents. Oh my God, look what little Timmy did. He made a sandcastle in the sand. Good for little Timmy. Get him an engineering degree. You are not snowflakes, and if you were, you'd melt at the first sign of heat, or trauma, or pain. Not up! Lily, there is no food down there. I guess you can hide back there if you want. I mean, you're not in trouble. If you want to chill back there, you can. But there's no food. She's trying to climb back behind my computer, I guess, because of all the places she's cold and I'm, like, overheating here. But whatever. For the next few days of Victor's new life, he thought of Risa almost constantly. While he was falling asleep, while he was just coming awake, while he was donating his sperm samples, while he was eating, while he was trying to learn the new language, all the time. But he could think of her only as you think of the dead, of the long dead, at that. He wondered, in an abstracted sort of way, if Risa had had a happy life after his freezing. He wondered if she had missed him, or if she had reconciled herself sooner or later to his loss and, say, married someone else. Someone like Marian, perhaps. She would have been a prized sort of wife for a great Catholic, Victor thought, because she was quite capable of being sexually active, but no longer of complicating his life by becoming pregnant. He told himself that he hoped she had married. He hoped she had been happy as anyone could be in that world anyway. He didn't go so far as to hope she hadn't missed him, and he did miss her, certainly he did. But it was a sort of remote, somehow well-aged pain. As soon as he had heard that the present date, he had almost felt the quick, irrevocable shifting of gears in his mind. That history was ancient. No one could mourn for 4,000 years. I can't mourn for 400 years. 40 years is even a stretch. Come on. The curtain had come down on the first 2 acts of his life. He was just beginning Act 3. It might not be the life he wanted, but it was the only life he had left. Lily! What are you doing down there? Hi! Hi! Are you warm? Comfy? Happy? What? She's so weird. Sorry. Victor forced himself to plunge into studying the language of these frail, remarkable people who had brought him back to life. It wasn't easy. The fog around his brain made everything difficult, but there was help for him. The biggest help was the desks. They were actually like his old teaching machines, he saw. They provided him with hours on end of conversation with the image of a friendly, helpful, wise teacher talking to him from the desk. The teacher was certainly not real. Victor knew that. It was a computer-generated three-dimensional picture, and the fact that it looked like an amiable, if exceptionally skinny, young man did not deceive him. It was real enough to correct his accent, straighten out his grammar, and provide him with the translation of every word and thought he needed. The others, who had been revived with him, were, of course, busy at the same thing. Only Jaren, the gentle giant, was finding the process as hard as Victor. Jaren was not a bright man. It wasn't freezer burn in Jaren's case. The man had just been born with a few slow linkages in his brain. Even with the cobwebs that cluttered his own mind, Victor was far quicker than Jaren. All the same, it was Jaren who became Victor's friend. The little weasel Mescro was too busy trying to make a friend of Minette to pay attention to anyone who had no power, and he had attached Corelto to himself. It was Jaren who helped Victor when he stumbled, Jaren who brought Victor food in those first days when Victor was too weak or too dazed to get up for it. He stood chastely by Victor, eyes averted, while Victor performed the rite of masturbation, and helped him back to bed when he was done. And he sat by Victor, talking when Victor had felt like talking, silently watching while Victor dozed. Prepare. Jaren was a big man, taller than Victor, far taller than most of the people on New Manhome's Ice Age. He was solid, too, a hulking bear of a man with a voice that was deep, but so soft it was almost inaudible. He seemed to try to stay out of everyone's way. When he spoke to anyone, he averted his eyes as to not challenge the other person. With all of Victor's own problems, there was something about Jaren that made Victor feel sorry for him, or feel contemptuous of him. Why would such a big man try so hard to efface himself? Only because he felt somehow small, and if a man thinks himself small, who is anyone else to say he isn't? Victor never succeeded in reconciling himself to what he had to do and to earn his keep, most of all because there was almost always someone there with him while he did it. Usually the person was Minette. The man seemed to enjoy humiliating his crew of sperm donors, and Victor more than the others, it appeared. If there had ever been anything about sex that Victor disliked, it was trying to perform in the morning, but Minette was adamant. "Do your job," he ordered. "Then you eat. Then you get back to studying the language, and don't argue with me." So, minutes after awakening every day, Victor was standing in the sperm donation cubicle trying to think erotic. What made it even more difficult was that sometimes Narina, the woman who had supervised his thawing, followed him into the chamber. Victor hated it when she stood behind him, because for some reason she had taken to watching with evident interest. Victor glared confusedly at her. What he could see through her transparent open mesh smock stirred something inside him, all right, but it wasn't enough. He appealed to Minette. I don't like her being here. It makes me, it interferes. Minette guffawed and translated. The woman replied politely. Victor thought he could almost understand what she was saying, now in her husky, sweet voice, but he was glad that Minette translated anyway. Minette didn't seem glad. He spoke sourly as though he didn't like what he was saying. She says she likes watching you. So go ahead. I don't think I can. What's that got to do with it? Wait a minute. He listened to Narina, then glowering addressed Victor again. She wants to know if you're really born on old Earth. Of course I was, I told you. And then turning to the woman, Victor said haltingly in her own language. This is true, yes. Get on with it, Minette ordered, looking angry. Or would you rather go back in the freezer? But the woman was laughing. She paused to say something to Minette and turned to leave the room. Minette looked annoyed. Do it and then come out, he ordered. And then Narina says to hurry up and finish learning the language. She wants to talk to you. Minette is jelly! I might be simple, but I come from an old time. From many thousands of years ago. Get off my lawn! Wait, there's a 4,476-year-old old guy. Whatever. Minette don't want you plowing her field. He jelly, like old school jelly. I think that's weird too, because I'm pretty certain whether Minette knows or not, she's been plowing all sorts of fields. I mean, if this is a group of people who just like to have sex for the fun of having sex, there's no way in hell she's only having sex with him. Anyway, onward and upward. The language wasn't as hard as Victor had first feared. A long time had passed, but there were still English words embedded in their vocabularies, or at least the ghosts of the words. The difference was far less than that between the language of his own day, whatever you took that day to be, and that of Beowulf. The vowel sounds had changed, the words were sometimes clipped and sometimes slurred, and there were many hundreds of wholly new words to learn, words that Victor had never heard before because the things they referred to had never existed before. But within a week he could understand some of what Narina was saying to Minette, and before long he could speak to her directly. 4,470-year-old fossil. Now that's grave robbing. Hey, I like to rob the cradle. She likes to rob the grave. Ew. I guess she's got a bone to pick with me. Anyway, onward. The Sorry, that one was a slow cooker. Onward. The desk teaching machines were marvelous tutors, and a good deal more. The desk was not simply for teaching. It did that function very well, but it was also an atlas and an encyclopedia and a patient tutor, repeating the same thing over and over again as long as Victor wanted it, until Victor's slowly recovering brain could absorb it. It was especially fine as a picture book. Even though Victor's brain was still fogged part of the time and his memory sketchy almost always, he could follow what the machines told him about his new world he was living in. The human population of New Manhome had not only recovered from its ice age, though not on New Manhome, it had flourished madly. There were 300 million people alive now, and it lived very well. Most of them were in what an earlier human would have called O'Neill habitats, and those were various but uniformly fine. Some were like an ancient English countryside, with trees and flowering plants and hedgerows. Animals like rabbits and foxes lived in the wooded parts. Songbirds and hummingbirds flew in their air. Some were like cities a mile through, with 10 million people huddled together. Some were quite strange. There was even a wilderness habitat here and there with grizzly bears and tigers, jungles and forests, even great slow waterfalls. Victor discovered that not everyone lived on the habitats. A few preferred to live on Nurgle's natural moons, now terraformed and quite comfortable. Most people tried to spend a little time on one of them now and then. It was a form of sport for them, moving about in a real gravity field, though a tiny one. They did it to keep their bodies in shape. Considering how their bodies had stretched out in those scores of generations in micro or low gravity, they did that very well. As Victor caught occasional glimpses of other inhabitants of the place, he could easily see that that was true. The people of this place didn't wear much in the way of clothing.
a cash sex, a simple strip of cloth that covered their sexual organs and the cleft between their buttocks was good enough for most practical purposes. Sometimes they wore a bit more. When Rena was busy in her laboratory, she wore a smock to keep the messes off her body, and sometimes she wore other things just for the prettiness of them. Women wore nothing on their breasts most of the time. They didn't need to. In the gentle gravity of the habitat, the breasts didn't sag. Whoop, whoop! Or as Archie would say, I bet you're glad for that microgravity. No saggy boobages, no need for bras. Hooray! Did you know, and when you think about it that way, bras are nothing more than anti-gravity devices for women. More specifically, they're anti-gravity devices for boobs. Humans have created anti-gravity devices for breasts. Yeah, we're pretty weird. The other side of that coin was that the males were less macho than Victor was used to. Much less. The males were not much bigger than the women. Not much stronger either. Victor thought large muscles weren't needed where they lived. The man, Decaduck, from Narina's laboratory turned out to be a puzzling exception. Particularly since none of them did much physical labor. Compared to them, Victor was a giant. He was bigger than most of his reawakened colleagues in the sperm bank. For that matter, since the new man home of their time had not provided its children with a generous diet and certainly never any fresh air. When Victor began to explore outside the immediate confines of Narina's laboratory, he encountered still more strangers. He even tried speaking to some of them now and again for language practice, but he was wary. When he looked at them, he did not fail to see that they were looking at him as well, and with just as much speculative interest. He thought that the branding on the forehead was probably a useful precaution. Some of the glances from females were frankly sexual, and Victor appreciated that very much, the memory of Risa slowly fading from his mind. No off-the-shoulder boulder holders? Well, I mean, you could consider it a hammock for breasts, but if you're more scientific in nature, you could always consider it a anti-gravity device for breasts. But there's a thing I saw on Twitter the other day that I retweeted. It says you were a ghost piloting a skeleton wrapped in a meat shield standing on a rock hurtling through space. Fear nothing. And I think I'm okay with that description. I think the part of that makes me happy is the piloting the skeleton bit. Because if I were to make a giant Gundam, it would be in the shape of a giant skeleton. Just saying. I thought it was over the shoulder? Well, it could be over the shoulder, off the shoulder. Some of them are just wraparounds. Of course, like all men, we are absolutely obsessed with bras. Where was I? Some of the sexually charged looks, however, were from people who were definitely male, and about that, Victor was far less pleased. By the time Victor could make himself understood to people like Narina, his life had fallen into a routine. He ate when food was offered, he slept when he was tired, he made his required 4 donations of sperm each day, a little surprised at himself, and not unpleased. After all, he was pretty nearly middle-aged man now. And between times, all the time, he tried to learn this world he was in. See, the sentences like that, that's not a sentence structure that my brain can properly interpret. And between times, all the time, that was properly done with commas and everything, he tried to learn this world he was in. Learn this world. I mean, it is grammatically correct, but is not the type of statement I would make. Learn about this world, you know, that kind of thing. That the word about is missing. So my brain expects, after the learn, it expects the word about, except it's not there. It's just learned this world he is in. Was in. It's just like... And underwear's under the butt nut hut? That's just weird. 4 times a day would leave you near infertile for a few days? Well, yeah, but it depends on what they're looking for. But again, they only need like 1 cell. So near infertile is just as good as not. I mean, they're not looking to impregnate, they're just looking to divide DNA. They'll get that out of almost every sample. Of course, Victor was not the only newcomer in the habitat. Jaren, Meskro, and Corelto were as innocent as himself, and 2 of them, at least, were curious. Jaren wasn't. Jaren took what came without complaint or question. His main interest was in following Victor around. But those 3 had an advantage Victor didn't share. All the things they wanted to know, Manet, the veteran of more than 8 months ahead of time out of the freezer, already knew, and told them. But it seemed that Manette just didn't like talking to Victor. For some reason, Victor could not guess why, Minette had taken a dislike to him. More than a dislike. Victor pondered without resolving the curious idea he had formed that sometimes when he caught Minette's eyes on him, the expression in them looked almost like fear. Then Nerina called him in for another examination. When Victor greeted her, careful with his pronunciation, the woman looked pleased, but she just waved him to the table. There she did all the things she had already done to Victor, touched his head with various instruments, studied the polychrome readings, and felt the part just above his temple that had hurt so badly, looking satisfied when he said it hurt no more. Your leg, then, she said, speaking slowly so that he could understand. He raised it obediently to the table, and she touched the buzzing rod to the dressing. The pink sausage fell neatly open. Victor looked and smelled and squinted his eyes shut, trying not to be sick. A big piece of his calf was gone. What was left stank of dead meat and decay. Nerina didn't seem to mind. She bent close to study it by eye and then more of the instruments that flashed rainbow colors for her. Then, satisfied, she sprayed it with something that felt like nothing at all, but quickly dissipated the terrible odor and left the exposed raw meat covered with a film of metallic gold. She pressed the two halves of the wrap back together and sat down facing Victor, her knees hugged to her breasts regarding him. When she spoke to Victor, it was slowly, a word at a time. You have suffered damage from improper freezing for a long time. Do you understand? He nodded. So there are two things. Your leg, it will, I think, be all right in a season. It will heal completely. That's good, Victor said. She nodded seriously. The brain, I don't know. Victor blinked at her. What? I have inserted additional material in your brain to replace what was lost. It may take. I think it has. Partly. Partly? Perhaps more? We must wait. I have been waiting, he said bitterly. She studied him thoughtfully for a moment, then smiling, she said, You will wait some more. Now go. You will help Minette. You must learn to do his work. Dun dun dun! Victor is his replacement! No, Victor! Minette's gonna train you to replace him so Nerina can bang you. Poor Minette. He had it cushy for 8 months, and then he gets replaced with a dullard. I like him. He's big and dumb. What is that about women? And I am generalizing here because I can. But what is that about women? They stand around going, I want a nice guy. I want a smart guy. I want a good guy. And then they see a dumb as dirt dickwad of a farmhand who's built like a tank, and they're like, take me, I love you. And you're like, what happened to that nice guy? It's like, I can change him. No, you can't. As thick as he is, he's just that dumb. I mean, don't get me wrong. Have fun. Enjoy. You know, let him plow your field as much as you want. But remember, he is an ox, okay? And if he gives you children, which I'm certain you're going to want, they're going to be oxes too. Women want to fix her upper. It's like they say that. They're like, it's like if they were buying a car. And I guess guys are kind of like this too, in the same way. And being a guy, maybe I don't see it, because you know, guys and girls, we go out to a car lot and we're like, "Hi, I'd like to see your used vehicles. I'd like something that's reliable, will get me where I'm going. It doesn't cost too much." And the guy's like, "Oh yeah, they're over here." And halfway to that particular parking lot, you stop by the brand newest car, shiniest, biggest, ugliest, gas guzzling thing you can get, and be like, "How much is that one?" And the guy's sitting there going, I thought you wanted to be like, no, this one's shiny. I like the shiny. I'll take it. He's like, but we had some nice Econo car. Nope. Don't care how many miles per gallon it gets. This is the one for me. that's we are dumb. And it happens every time. Every time. But it's just like people, of course, who want to tell everybody, they say, hey, I want to exercise, and I want to get healthy, and I want to be a better person. And then you're like, okay, well, we can go to the gym. Nah, too busy to go to the gym. Well, here's the salad. Nope, I want a burger. You're like, are you going to do any of the things you said? Probably not. Magpie mind kicks in. Ooh, shiny. All right, I'm going to step away for a minute. I'll be back in like 2 minutes. Enjoy the fireplace. I'm not going to bother switching out scenes or anything. I'm not going to be gone that long. So enjoy the fireplace. I'll be back and we'll continue with the story. We got about an hour left before I got to go, so it should be enough to get through at least 1 or 2 more chapters. Maybe we'll see 1, 2 again. So I shall return. You know, thinking about it, now that I've returned, with all the changes that Twitch has made to their system, I don't think there's going to be a partnership program anymore. And what I mean by that is I think partners will remain partners, but I've been thinking about the numbers, because it's a numbers game. And Twitch does not need partners. It doesn't need partners. It has what it needs now. Every person worth 2 cents, or every person who's being given money on Twitch now gets a cut. So why extend your partnership any further than an affiliate program, right? And the reason why I was thinking about the numbers specifically, not because of the money, you know, I've already established my view on that, but the thing I have is that there's been some complaints regarding view counts, host counts, and following. And the reason why is because with Twitch's new app, basically you get follows constantly. Not because people like your content or enjoy what they see, but because when you first sign into the app, Twitch says, now tell us what games you like. And when you say I like these games, it says here's some streamers who are following those who are streaming those games, follow them. And it won't let you continue until you have. It literally forces you to follow random streamers. So people click on your name and they follow you. But not because they want to view your content. Maybe some do. Maybe some do. I mean, some people have stated that they've asked, hey, how many people have followed because of the app? And a couple of people raise their hand and be like, I did. You're like, awesome, cool. You know, I'm glad that you were able to follow. Hooray. But for the most part, out of that's like 5 or 10 people out of, say, like 200 or 300 followers in like a week. So your follower count, because Twitch knows now why you're getting so many followers, your follower count no longer counts towards partnership. You say, hey, I got like 7,000 followers, and they say, well, that's nice. We know why you got 7,000 followers. It's because our app forced them to follow you. So then it goes by viewership. So you're like, okay, well, what about my viewers? I have lots of viewers, right? Well, the problem is that Twitch instituted a new type of following system. And what that is, is when Twitch, or when you're on the app, so you go on the app and you're on the app. When you're on the app, it not only loads your stream chat, but to the right and left of you on the viewership list, it loads their chat too. So you're actually locked into 3 different chat windows at the same time. And the reason why is they said so you can flip through channels, i.e. you flip to the next channel and you're already in that chat, so you don't have to wait for chat to load, which to me makes no sense. What it does do, however, is artificially amp up the amount of people in your chat. And since the Twitch viewer count comes from the number of people in your chat, not from the number of people who have access to your viewing window, your viewer count number is no longer correct either. So your follower count has been artificially inflated. Your viewer count not only includes your stream, but to the stream to your left and to your right, which is slightly less viewers than you, and then could possibly be hundreds more viewers than you. And so the two numbers that they would need in order to approve partnership, when you're like, hey, look how cool I am, look how popular I am, they can literally say, no, those numbers are artificially inflated, and therefore you're not that cool, and we don't have to give you partnership. And of course, because you're already an affiliate, most people, they're still getting the money they get, but they're not required to give you anything for it. And I just wanted to throw that out there because it was funny to me, because I thought to myself, how are they approving partnerships now if all these numbers are artificially inflated? And the answer is they don't have to. They can literally tell everybody now to piss off. So I'm assuming that if you had not become a partner prior to the affiliate program and prior to this new app update, you're basically probably not going to become a partner at all. Or it's going to be much more rare than it once was. Which it was very rare before. I was looking at getting the audiobook for this to catch up on what I had missed. When I heard the preview how the guy pronounced 1-2's name as 1-2, I couldn't take it. Am I not pronouncing it properly? Because it is supposed to be Wan. It's W-A-N, 1-2. I just pronounced it 1-2 because it's easier to go faster. It's for speed and brevity and your mom! Anyway, so I'll stop complaining about Twitch. thus pushing myself farther away from partnership. They're like, oh, he talked bad about us again, push him farther away from partnership. Because people in power can't distance themselves from that power, so as soon as their feelings get hurt, they have to hit you with the I'm in charge stick. As in big toe. Oh, toe. Oh, so Wanto? Well, I guess it could be Wanto, T-O. But it's T-O, it's two. Wanto. No, it's 1-2. Like 1-2. You know. Screw that guy, he doesn't know English. He's not a professional audiobook reader or anything. Actually, the audiobook you probably listened to was most likely read by Pohl himself. So therefore he even know how to pronounce it properly. Anyway, so back to Minette being replaced by Victor. Bad Victor, bad. Fan back on in case you guys are wondering. Minette was waiting for Victor outside the examination room, and his expression was even more dour than usual. When Victor asked him what Narina had meant, Minette flared up. It means she's going to give you my job. Damn your hide, he rasped. Come on, I'll show you what to do, but just don't talk to me. And he led the way to the outermost shell of the habitat, where the wraith-like but oddly muscled man who had tattooed Victor in the first place was waiting impatiently for them. Gonna go look at who recorded the audio now. The man wasn't wearing a filmy robe now. He was dressed in shiny, copper-colored things like overalls, which covered everything from neck to feet, and he had a hood of the same material in his hand. This is Decaduck, Minette said, short and surly. Get dressed. Decaduck looked at him inquiringly, but didn't say anything either. He waited while Victor struggled into the same sort of garment. It was light and flexible, but it felt metallic. Still, it was elastic, too, because it slid over the sausage round Victor's lower leg easily enough. Now, Decaduck said, we go inside. He was speaking the language of the habitat people. Because Victor was concentrating on what he was doing, it took a moment for him to understand. Minette helped him along with a shove. Decaduck said, move, he snapped. Get your damn hood on. Then Victor found out what his job was. All three of them donned their hoods, then crowded all together into a tiny cubicle. Minette pulled the outer door closed. It was thick but light, and opened a door on the other side. Immediately, the transparent front of Victor's hood clouded over, and he felt a stinging cold. A moment later, he could feel Minette roughly poking at his back, doing something that resulted first in a faint click, then a hiss. The icy cold of the suit warmed. Warm air began to flow through the hood. Gradually, the frosted inside of the faceplate began to clear. It's William Dufree. Oh, excuse me, William Dufree. Dufree. Okay, so I do not know William Dufree, but I apologize that his pronunciation is not on par with mine. Victor could see Minette's face bending toward his, and through the two visors he could see the man's look of sour satisfaction. When Minette spoke, Victor could see his lips move, but the voice came from inside the hood, right next to his ear. You're all hooked up, Minette announced. Now let's shift some stiffs. And so they did. For an hour or more, warm inside their heated suits, with their warmed air supply from the cables that connected them to sockets in the wall, and the stiffs they moved were corpuscles from the cryonics chamber on New Manhome. What Minette and Victor did was the hard work, pulling out the old capsules, opening them to show the frozen bodies inside. The air in the freezer must have been searingly dry, for no frost had collected on either capsules or bodies. Some were face down, and they were the easiest. All Victor and Minette had to do was to pull or cut away the hard frozen fabric over the hip, and then stand aside while Decaduck thrust a triangular blade instrument into each patch of rock-hard flesh to gouge out a tiny sample. The ones who had been frozen face up were more difficult. They had to be lifted out, or at least turned to one side, so that Decaduck could get at them. And then Victor could see some of the frozen faces. Some were almost as though only asleep. Some were contorted. Some seemed to be silently screaming. He's British, so he won't say it right. Or maybe he's saying it more properly than I am. Remember, British is closer to the original English than my English is. Then they slid the capsule back, each marked with its star or cross or crescent. Victor was glad when it was over, because it was frightening to look on the corpuscles and know that not long before he had been just like them, and not very far in the future maybe might well be back there again. But in his own study room, as he leaned over the teaching desk, he blew on his fingers. They weren't really cold. It was his soul that was cold. He thought it would never be warm again. But as he talked to his unreal mentor on the desk, he began to forget the freezer. What shall we study today, Victor? The simulacrum greeted him. It is up to you to choose. Thank you, Victor said, aware that he was thinking no one real. Can you show me some more pictures, please? Of course. Incidentally, your accent is getting much better. But what pictures would you like to see? Well, Victor said, I used to be interested in astronomy. Can you show me what the skies look like now? I mean, not just Nergal, but everything? Of course, the tutor said. Perhaps it would be best to display it as a surround. It disappeared from the desk, and at once an image sprang up all around Victor. The image blotted out everything but itself, and it was almost all black. You are looking, the disembodied voice went on, at every astronomical object that is visible from your present position. The habitats have been omitted. Indeed, Victor saw there was the glowing cinder of Nergal. There behind Victor, the sun blazed, not very bright, he thought, but then they were much farther away than New Manholm. Perhaps it really had been, it had regained all of its luminosity. A couple of quite bright things had perceptible disks, some of Nergal's moons, no doubt. He picked out a few smaller bright object stars, and a couple of planets. Apart from that, nothing. Nothing. Victor sat up straight, staring around at the sparsely featured sky. But where's the universe? He cried. You are referring to the optical concentration that was visible for some time, the calm, disembodied voice said. That began to dim 1,300 years ago, Victor, and by 800 years ago it was no longer detectable at all. What you see is the universe, Victor. There isn't anything else. And then, with a sickening certainty, Victor at last began to believe it had indeed been 4,000 years. 2 days later, what Manette had said came true. When Victor and the others started toward the room with the sample tubes ready to do their work of filling them, Manette appeared. He looked angry and frightened at the same time. Forget it, he said. Irina says she's got enough from you guys. He swallowed. We're leaving. All but Victor. He stays here. Leaving for where? Corelto demanded, startled. Meskro looked searchingly at his mentor's face. You've been fired, he guessed accusingly. Shut up, Meskro, Manette snarled. Let's go. There's a bus waiting. But, Jaren cried, blinking as he tried to take the new situation in. But we need to get ready. For what? You've got nothing to pack, Manette said cruelly. Come on, not you, he added to Victor, with poison in his voice. Narina wants to see you. Now. And thus, without warning, they were gone. Only Jaren tarried to shake Victor's hand sadly and to say goodbye. Victor wasn't even allowed to follow them to their bus. Narina was in the corridor, and she beckoned him to follow her. She was wearing a filmy rainbow-colored thing that might have once been called a negligee. It veiled, without hiding, the fact that under it she wore nothing at all, not even the cache sex. Victor averted his eyes because there was something he really wanted to ask the woman, and her scanty attire made it difficult. It is very interesting to me that you were born on old Earth, she told him seriously as they walked. Here, this is my home. You may come in. He followed her uneasily through the doorway. She's gonna bang your brains out, Victor! Just get on with it! Sorry. When they were inside, she clapped her hands and it closed behind them. It was not a large room, but it was prettily festooned with growing things, and there was a scent of flowers in the air. There was one of those desk things, of course, and soft pillows thrown about. The only other large bit of furniture in the room was a soft cup-shaped thing, like the cup of a mushroom turned upside down. It looked very much like a bed. Narina sat on the edge of the cup-shaped thing, which was large enough for her to stretch out on easily. She looked at Victor appraisingly before she spoke. Have you any questions for me, Victor? She asked. Indeed he had, many, and a number that he didn't quite want to ask. He fumbled. I did want to know something, Rena. Is my brain severely damaged? Severely? She thought for a moment. No, I would not say severely, she said at last. Much of your memory has come back, has it not? Perhaps more will. The damage may not be permanent. May not. She shrugged. It was a graceful movement, but with the extreme slimness of her body it made Victor think of a snake slowly writhing in its coils. What difference does it make? It makes a great difference to me. She thought that over, looking at him carefully. Then she smiled. But it makes none to me, Victor, she pointed out. And she lay back on the bed, still smiling at him, but now with a wholly different expression. He felt himself responding instinctively. His hands went to the brand on his forehead. Oh, she said, reaching out with her own hand to take his. That is all right, Victor. I have fixed myself so that I cannot be fertilized. But I do want to know, I want very much to know, how you people from old Earth made love. Of course you do, you sullen wench! We did it poorly, and in high gravity, and it was sweaty and sticky and gross, and sometimes we fell off of things. But that never stopped us! And there was hair pulling, and spit, and sweat, and sometimes blood. You don't want the blood! Sorry. Sorry. Sex is funny. And awkward. And weird. Mostly awkward and weird. But I might be doing it wrong. Good times. I realized I need more water in me before I go today to get numbs, or not to get numbs, excuse me, to have my blood taken away. He's very Kirk right now. Teach me of this thing you call love. Show me this show me more of this earth thing called kissing. Chapter 21. Yeah, we still have some time. We can go through 21. Hey, hey! 1-2! Told you we get to go back and see 1-2 again. By now, the universe was getting pretty old, and 1-2 was very nearly the age of the universe. There was a redeeming feature to that, though, because the older 1-2 got, the longer it took for him to become older still. That wasn't because of the relativistic effect of time dilation. It had nothing to do with the velocity of his motion. It was only a matter of energy supply. 1-2 was living on a starvation diet, and it had made him very slow. When 1-2 was young or middle-aged or even quite elderly, say when he had reached the age of a few 100 billion years, he aged quickly because he did everything quickly. 1-2 was a plasma person. It was the flashing pace of nuclear fusion that drove his metabolism. Changes of state happened at the speed of the creation and destruction of virtual particles, winking in and out of existence as vacuum fluctuations. That was how it had been once. It wasn't that way anymore. 1-2 was almost blind now. He could not spare the energy for all those external eyes, but it didn't much matter, because what was there to see in this sparse, dark, cold universe? He did keep a tiny ear open for the sound of possible communications, though even possible, he knew, was stretching it. Who was there to communicate? 1-2's physical condition in itself was awful. How awful just to have a physical condition at all. He was trapped. He was embedded in a nearly solid mass, like a man buried in sand up to his neck. It wasn't impossible for him to move. It was only very difficult and painful and agonizingly slow. He could have left. He could have cut himself loose from this corpse of a star to seek another, but there weren't any others better than the one he was in. The wonderful, quick, bright phase of his existence was so far in the past that 1-2 hardly remembered it. His memory, too, was a function of how much energy he had to spare for it. A lot of memory was, so to speak, shut down, on standby, one might say, to hoard what powers he had available. The kind of energies to support that sort of life had disappeared. There wasn't any nuclear fusion anymore. Not anywhere in the universe as far as 1-2 could see or imagine. Every fusible element had long since fused. Every fissionable one had fizzed. And so the stars had gone out. All of them. Every last one. Stars were history, and history now had run for so many endless eons that even 1-2 no longer kept count of the time. But time passed anyway. And now the universe had lived for more than 10,000 million years. That was a number without much meaning even to 1-2. A human would have written it as the number 1 followed by 40 zeros. He wouldn't have understood it either. But he could have juggled numbers around to give an idea of what it meant. He might, for instance, have said that if the entire age of the universe at the time when the human race first started thinking seriously about it, everything from the Big Bang to, say, the 20th century on Earth had only been 1 second. Then on the same scale, its present age was coming right up on something like 50,000 billion years. And of course that number wouldn't have meant much either, except that anyone could see it as a very, very long time. If 1-2 had been of a philosophical bent, he might have said to himself something consoling like, "At least I've had a good run for my money," or "You only live once, but if you do it right, once is enough." 1-2 was not that philosophical. He was not at all willing to go gladly into that long, dark night. He would have resisted it with all his force, if he had known a way to do it, and if he had had enough force to be worth talking about to resist it with. Time was when 1-2 had hurled stars about in all the vigor of his mighty youth, had even made stars out of clouds of dust, had even made himself a new galaxy or two, when all the ones in sight were beginning to dim toward extinction. He had remembered that much at least because it gave him pleasure to mull over in his mind the wonderful primordial galaxy-sized clouds that he had caused to collapse and to begin to spin and to twinkle with billions of stars coming to life. Nothing in the universe was more powerful than one who had been then creator and destroyer of galaxies. That had been a brave time. But that time was long gone. In 10 to the 40th power years, most things are long gone. Spoon has come back from the outside place. I hope the Daystar did not hurt your skin. All that radiation. What had happened in that long stretch of years? Excuse me. What had happened in that long stretch of years? The answer to that is simple. Everything had happened. The last of the galaxies had formed and evaporated and died. The last of the new stars had formed eternities before, and as that last huge gas cloud shuddered into motion, as a comprehensibility wave jolted it and caused it to crash together to form a new star, there couldn't be any new stars anymore. There might still be a vagrant wisp of dust here and there, but gravitational attraction wasn't strong enough to make it coalesce. That wasn't because anything had happened to gravity itself. It was just a matter of the law of inverse squares, after all. The universe was still expanding. It could not make more matter of energy, but it kept right on making more space. As the universe expanded, it cooled. There was more and more of it every second, and so the remnant heat was diluted more and more, and so everything was farther and farther away from everything else. And so for that, the distances were quite meaningless. Not to worry, the unshielded fusion reactor has disappeared behind more land a while ago, so hardly any radiation at all. Oh yeah, I guess it's come around to my side. That's okay. I have a nice radiation shield in the form of a cloud bank, so that's helping. It's gonna be muggy as hell outside, though. I know it is. Where was I? Lost. Ah. The last of the big, bright stars had long since gone supernova. The last of the Sol-type stars had gone supergiant and turned into a white dwarf. All of those profligate wastrels of energy had long since burned themselves out. The red dwarfs had a somewhat longer run for their money. They were the smallest and longest lived of those furnaces of nuclear fusion that were called stars, but then they had gone too. The last of them had long before burned itself to a lump of iron, warmed by the only energy source that was left, the terminally slow decay of the protons themselves. Proton decay. It hurt Wantu's pride to have to live by so feeble an energy source as proton decay. WTF is this? It's reading, good sir! Hi, Aver. It's reading. Frederik Pohl. You know what? I didn't have the title up on the screen this whole time. It's Frederik Pohl's The World at the End of Time. We're on chapter 22. You're welcome to stay. If you like words. Books and stories! Books and stories! Books without stories are called sketchbooks. Where was I? Proton decay! That's where I was. The only good thing about it was that it lasted a long time. When a proton decays, 2 up quarks and 1 down quark turn into a positron, which goes off and annihilates the first electron it comes across. And a quark-antiquark pair, which is to say a meson. The meson doesn't matter to anyone after that. The positron-electron annihilation procedure produces heat. A little heat. And all this happened very slowly. If the average lifespan of a proton was, well, let's not play the big number game anymore. Let's just say it's a gazillion years. That didn't mean every proton in the universe would expire on the tick of that moment. That was average. Mathematics showed that the half-life of a proton should then be about 7/10 of a gazillion. By then, Wantu would be in even more straitened circumstances with half the protons gone. In another such period, half the remainder would be gone, and then half of that remainder. The time was in sight. Wantu saw with gloom, when there would just not be enough whole protons in any one cadaver of a star to keep him warm. The word warm is an exaggeration. No human would have thought one of those hard, dead lumps very warm. The highest temperature proton decay could retain for it was less than a dozen degrees above absolute zero. But that was when, after everything had happened, everything stopped happening. Because there wasn't enough energy anywhere to drive events. To read the entire book on stream? Yes. The entire book, front to back, although it does take me some time. I mean, it is rather a large book, and I've skipped a few weekends. But we're getting close to the end. We're nearing chapter 20... The hell number is this? Chapter 22. And we have about a half hour left, so I think we can get through another chapter of Victor's brain freeze. Derp. and Wantu's complaining about having destroyed all the stars because he's an idiot. A few degrees above absolute zero wasn't what Wantu considered warm either, but it was all there was left for him. The solid matter he had once despised, the iron corpses that was all that was left of his last star, was the only home he could find. It had not been easy for Wantu to adapt to such a horrid environment. It had only been possible at all by resigning himself to the loss of most of his functions, and the slowing down of all there were left. Now the milliseconds of Wantu's life dragged for thousands of years. That was quite fast enough in one way, for there wasn't much left for Wantu to do, except to contemplate the fact that his future had no future except eternity. He wasn't even good at contemplating anymore, for his mind was fuzzy from deprivation. Fuzzier even than that of the person who was almost as old as he was, Victor Sorkane. That was just as well, because in his moments of clarity, Wantu realized that nothing was ever going to get better for him. All that would happen would be that the clinker he lived in would slowly cool even further, until there was no energy at all left to keep him alive. And the horrible part of that was that it would go on forever, or close enough, for so long that even his present age would seem only a moment before the last proton expired and he was finally dead. Nothing but a miracle could change his hopeless certain destiny. Wantu didn't believe in miracles. A miracle had to come from somewhere, and Wantu could see no place in the doddering, dying universe where a miracle might still be born. Of course, he had long since forgotten the dozen stars he had hurled out of that ancient galaxy at so vast a speed that time, for that little system, had almost stopped. Dun dun dun! Foreshadowing. I don't know, is it foreshadowing if it's a positive thing that's coming? I mean, foreshadowing just means, building up suspense for something that's coming. Chapter 22. Back to Victor, who's getting laid by what amounts to a floaty snake lady. Humans are weird. We evolve funny. If it were not for the odd, bleak flashes of memory that sometimes cut through the fog in Victor's brain, memories of Risa that came and went, painful while they were there, memories of the children long dust, which left a dismal sense of hopeless loss, if it weren't for those things, Victor might easily have thought his third act of his life close to the best. To be sure, it was just a touch humiliating. Never once had Victor imagined that his main career would be in sexually servicing a skinny 7-foot woman with huge eyes. Yet it had its compensations. As the recognized lover of Nrina. How did I pronounce her name? It's Nrina. There it is. N-R-I-N-A. Nrina. Victor became a privileged person. He wasn't a husband, of course. The only rights he had over Nrina were to share her bed, sometimes her company, when she wasn't working. When she wasn't doing something else that she didn't wish to share with him, the basic job he had been thought... Oh, there it is. Damn it, Frederick. Get your sentences in the right damn order. This is one of those sentences that are grammatically correct but written in such a way as to be confusing. The basic job he had been thought out for in the first place, as donator of sperm for her collection of useful genetic materials, no longer existed for him. Thank you. Nrina explained that she had all the samples she needed for future genetic engineering. She now had better employment for that particular function. His only present responsibility was to give her pleasure, all of which added up to the fact that he didn't like to say it explicitly, but there was an old and unflattering expression for what he was. He was kept. When Minette told him, with all that surly resentment, that Nrina had decreed Victor was to take over his job, Victor had thought it meant supervising the next batch of thought-out sperm donors. But when, tentatively, Victor asked Nrina when they were going to do the thawing, she looked at him in surprise. "Oh, not now, Victor," she said, stroking his shoulder affectionately. "First, Decaduck and I must run the DNA assays on them, to see which are worth the trouble of thawing. Don't you see? And we have much other work to do, important work, orders to fill with deadlines which we must meet. No, it will be weeks at least, perhaps a whole season before we are ready to acquire more material. But now, are you hungry? No? Then why don't we go to my bed again?" And he understood that what had once been Minette's main job was indeed now his. Hooray! Sex! Constantly. I don't know, is that a bad thing? You get food, you don't have to do anything, you get laid all the time. I'm not seeing a downside here. Anybody else? I mean, unless they're secretly going to eat him, or they turn him into Soylent Green when they're done. I mean, positive events. Too bad for Minette, though. Narina's life wasn't his, though. Even her home wasn't really his. Victor was surprised, and on reflection not very pleased, to find that the private chamber she had first taken him to was only a sort of guest room. Narina's own home was far larger and very much more complex and beautiful. It had one big room with a transparent ceiling. Well, it wasn't always transparent because Narina could turn it off when she chose. And then it was only a sort of pattern of shifting, nebulous, luminous, multicolored pastel colors, and that sentence was hard to read. And it wasn't really transparent, being only a sort of huge TV screen that showed the outside universe. In the center of the room, a cloudy sphere as tall as Victor's head showed shapes in milky pastel light, though most of the room's illumination came from the gently glowing walls. Narina's people didn't seem to like harsh lighting. Then there was another room, quite small but large enough for their needs. It held her own bed. That one looked terribly flimsy to Victor. It was cantilevered out from the wall, and it did not look to Victor as though it was built to stand very vigorous activity in it. He was wrong about that, he discovered. The habitat's low gravity helped. There wasn't any kitchen exactly. There was a room with a cupboard that was a sort of a freezer and fridge, and another that was sort of a microwave oven. That was all they needed, these people, Victor found, didn't ever fry or boil anything, especially not hunks of dead animal flesh. That was where Victor ate most of the time. Narina sometimes too, though often enough she was off somewhere else with whom Victor never knew. That was not a problem in any practical way. There was always plenty to eat. Once Victor learned how to handle the heating apparatus, he always found stews and porridges and soups and hashes ready in the fridge and sherbets in the freezer and any number of different kinds of fresh fruits, always fresh, always perfect too. Though some of them were wholly unfamiliar to Victor, and a few were perfectly foul to his taste. He wondered who replenished them. Certainly not Narina. Nor was Victor idle. Not really idle, he told himself. He was in fact very busy learning about his new life he had been given. He had the freedom to roam where he would on the habitat. He used that freedom too, except when his leg was hurting too badly. That wasn't often anymore, but there were days when the pain was acute all day long. Then it hurt all the time, when it wasn't itching. Sometimes it both itched like a bad sunburn and hurt like a new scald. Those days weren't a total waste, because he could spend them hunched over the communicator desk, learning all he could. But when the leg was no more than mildly annoying, he preferred to walk around. You couldn't see much of the habitat at any one time, because everything was inside. There weren't many large open spaces. Certainly wasn't ever any sky, for a ceiling was never very far overhead. Strangely, much of the place was bent. The longest corridors were straight as lesser beams, but the ones at right angles to them had perceptible upward curves. The place was like a rolled-up version of Homeport, say. Of any city spread out on its land, except that this one had been rolled around and joined in a kind of tube. Everything Victor saw was in the outer skin of that tube. That was why those transverse hallways were always curved. Victor discovered that if he went all the way around one, it wasn't really far, a 20-minute walk at most when his leg wasn't bothering him, he would come right back to his starting point. You have chocolate and blankets? Is it cold, Spoon? Because it's hot as hell over here. Can I have some of your cold, please? What was in the middle? Machinery. Narina told him when he asked her. They were lying together in her cantilever bed, nibbling on sweet little plums, both quite relaxed. The machinery, she said, was all different kinds. The core of the habitat was where they kept the air cleaners, to filter out the wastes and replenish the oxygen, and the temperature regulators, and the generators for electrical energy, and the communications equipment, and the data machine files, and, in short, everything that was needed to make the habitat comfortably habitable, all tidily out of sight. She yawned, pitching a plum pit on the floor and nestling cozily close to him. But Victor was wide awake. It was all a wonder to him. Technologically wonderful, of course, but also wonderful to think of starved, poverty-stricken refugees from old New Manhome building all these things, enough of them to hold 300 million people. Well, they didn't build them all at once, Victor, Narina pointed out reasonably, stretching her long, slim legs. Slim, now to Victor's mind, no longer skinny, and yawning again. Once they got a good start, it was easy enough. There were plenty of asteroids to mine for materials, and Nergal gave off a lot of heat, as long as you got close enough to it. Of course, now that the sun's back in business, we wouldn't need to stay around Nergal anymore, but why would we bother to move? Well, to a planet, Victor began. New Manhome, for instance, they say it's warmed up. Planets, she scoffed. Planets are nasty. Certainly now that New Manhome is pretty well thought out, people can survive there, but who would want to? I would, Victor thought, but he wasn't sure he meant it, so all he said was, some people might. Some silly people do, she admitted. There are a few odd ones who seem to enjoy poking through the old records, and of course we need someone to pick over the freezers to find whatever organisms are left that might supply useful DNA. I don't call that living, Victor. And she went on to explain why it certainly wasn't any kind of life she would stand for herself. The gravity. Why on New Manhome they had to move around in wheelchairs most of the time, even if they'd taken the muscle building and calcium binding treatments that would let them stand in it at all. As it turned out, I want to call him Deck Kirk, but no, Decaduck had those incongruous knots of muscle. That much gravity certainly wasn't good for anybody, not to mention the discomfort. No, it wasn't at all a kind of life she personally could tolerate. And then, stroking his thigh, she interrupted herself. Hold still a minute, Victor, she ordered, leaning over to poke at his leg. Does that feel all right? He craned his neck to peek at the pink sausage casing. I guess so. I almost forgot it's there. Reminded, he was aware of the smell. The wrapping was porous to let the wound breathe as it healed, and odors did leak out. Narina didn't seem to mind. I'd better take another look, she decided, and then, oh no, I'm meaning Kotlini. Well, Decaduck can do it. Go over and tell him to give you an examination. Examine me, Deck! Part of my thigh's missing! Decaduck was waiting for him when Victor got to the examination room. His expression was hostile. It was no worse than Victor had expected. Decaduck did not seem to be a friendly man. Their first meeting had been when Decaduck had tattooed the fertility warning on Victor's forehead. All right, that was just a duty, and if it had been painful, probably that couldn't be helped. But ever since the time they had taken DNA samples from Nina's corpuscles, along with the departed Manette, Decaduck had given every sign of despising the man from old Earth. Ouch! Victor exclaimed as Decaduck peeled the dressing off his leg. That might not have been on purpose. Still, removing the dressing didn't hurt when Nina did it. Then, as the full aroma of the healing room floated to his nostrils, Decaduck muttered furiously to himself and ostentatiously turned the room's ventilation higher. Well, it did stink, but that much? Narina didn't appear to find the smell intolerable after all. Decaduck hurt him, Victor kept count, 8 different times in the course of a 2-minute examination. Even the healing cleaning spray he used to cover the pink new flesh stung bitterly. Narina's hadn't. And when he was through, the leg was rebandaged. Decaduck simply said, "You're healing. Go away now." Victor went. Once away from Decaduck's touch, the leg hardly hurt at all anymore. As he strolled along the corridor, he was thinking of possible explanations for the man's hostility. It could, of course, be just his nature. Decaduck might simply have interests of his own, and regard this rude survivor from prehistoric ages, Victor Soricane, as an irritating irrelevance. I want to be an irritating irrelevance. Oh wait, I am! But there was another possibility that Victor thought likely. What if Decaduck were not only Narina's assistant, but her lover? More likely ex-lover, and jealous. It was a quite plausible theory, Victor thought. It was even one that gave him a certain amount of satisfaction, because there was enough rude, prehistoric criminality in Victor's genetic predispositions to allow him to enjoy beating out another male for a mate. He had been walking without paying much attention to where he was going. He passed other people from time to time, some he had met before, even spoken to. He was beginning to be on nodding terms, at least, with some of Narina's neighbors, and as he got used to the stretched-out, willowy shapes of these people, he began to notice individual differences. At first they all had looked alike, like members of some famine-stricken basketball team, then he began to distinguish among them. Some were darker than others. Hair color varied from so pale and fine that it seemed almost transparent to coarse strands like charcoal-colored knitting wool. Both men and women might have facial hair, though women's was usually only a pair of narrow sideburns. Quite a few of the people struck Victor as downright ugly. Noses that were splayed, hooked, or reduced to the size of a shirt button, teeth that seemed too big for their mouths, or in one particular case, a woman with vampire incisors that lay against her lower lip. She had seemed more willing to be friendly than most. Victor had not encouraged her. On New Manhome, at least on the fat, rich New Manhome of his youth, Victor would have wondered why these people hadn't had orthodontia or plastic surgery. Here he wondered even more, because those traits had to be on purpose. Some parents had gone to some genetic engineer with Narina and had chosen that receding chin, those pendulous ears for their children. As Victor strolled, idle and aimless, he saw the vampire-toothed woman coming toward him. She was even taller than Narina, and, in the same ethereal way as Narina, of course, quite as pretty. Not counting those disconcerting teeth, of course. The woman had let Victor clearly know that strange, big-muscled primitives out of the Freezatorium were in some way quite interesting, though she had only looked regretfully at the tattoo on his forehead. But Victor only nodded to her now. It wasn't that his fertility was a serious problem. If Narina had some kind of contraception, this other woman could probably manage it too, but that meant a different kind of problem. Kept men, Victor was nearly sure, were expected to be faithful to their keepers. He was quite a bit further away from Narina's area than he remembered going before. Ahead of him, the corridor suddenly widened to an open space. There was a little pond, and around it were patches of growing things. It was a farm. And that's when you get every two kind of animals together, it's called a zoo! Unless it's a farm! Sorry. I was meeting the soldier in my head. Not cold, but hardly anything I would call warm. Fair enough. Garbage day. Garbage truck's out there today. Bumping and clumping about. Narina had told him there was a farm in the habitat, though he had never seen it before. It was really very pleasant. It wasn't at all like any farm on ancient New Manhome because of the funny way it bent, pond and all, and the fact that the sky was almost within touching distance over his head. But there were growing things here. He recognized some of them as having been in Narina's locker, and was pleased to bend down and pick a tomato? Something that tasted like a tomato anyway, although it was a deep purple in color. It occurred to him that it was possible these plants belonged to someone. He looked around. There was no one in sight. He ate the tomato, nibbling around the stem, and tossed the little green remnants to the ground as he strolled. That was curious, too, he observed, for the ground wasn't really ground. This was no plowed half-acre of somebody's produce garden. The tomato vines grew out of long, bulk-headed rows of something that was paler and spongier than any earth Victor had ever seen, and between the rows were immaculately swept footpaths. Someone kept this farm extraordinarily neat. Then Victor caught a glimpse of one of the someones. He was at the far end of the open space, and as he turned to go back, he saw some dark-skinned person at the edge of the pond. He didn't actually see the whole person. The pond, and the land around it, had curved up until they were almost hidden by the bulge of the ceiling between. Okay, so this is the point where we learn that anyone who's not donating sperm is used as slave labor. 'Cause future people suck. And everyone who wrote books in the 60s and 70s, and even into the 80s, states that you cannot have a great future, like you cannot have this great, immaculate future without some kind of underclass being trodden on for their pleasure. You know, you think that in a world where we write stories where there are robots that do everything for us, that you wouldn't have poor people. But even in those stories where the robots do all the hard work, the poor people are required to fix the robots. It's like we can't see a world where people are like all at the top. There's rich, fat, ugly people, or rich, thin, gravity-less people, and then there's everyone else underneath. It's like, we're the damn robots, man. But whatever. We'll continue on. So strange to look at. One wondered why the pond didn't spill out. What Victor saw was someone's feet, seemingly wearing dark furry boots, and someone's hands tipping a sort of bucket into the lake. Immediately, the surface of the pond at that point began to erupt into little spouts of fountains. Fish were feeding there. Pleased with the discovery, Victor started back in that direction. The fish feeder was faster than he. By the time he got to where he could see the whole other end of the farm enclosure, there was no one there. But the splashes he had been seeing were definitely fish feeding. They were still swirling around just under the surface of the water, rising to snap at little bits of something edible floating where the fish attendant had left them. It would be nice, Victor thought, to feed the fish himself sometime. Feeling at ease after his stroll, he went back to Narina's home and busied himself with the teacher desk, awaiting her return from her laboratory. See, if I were at that teaching desk, I'd be like, who does all the real work? And if the desk be all like, it's slave labor, I'd be like, aha, desk. That's what I thought. I guess that'd be wouldn't that kind of ruin the story, though, as soon as you're unthawed or brought forth or land on another planet, and they're like, here's the teaching machine. Go ahead and learn anything you want about it. I'd be like, show me the cultural layout, show me the layout of this culture. Who's on top? Who's in the middle? Who does all the work? How are prisoners handled? That'd be my thing. But he's just like, this future is perfect. It's like, yeah, whenever there's a perfect future underneath it, there's usually some guy beating a poor guy who has not gotten enough food to death because he didn't do his work properly. Or was seen in public or something. She was later than Victor expected, but he didn't mind. His unreal mentor of the desk hardly ever had to correct his grammar anymore, but he remained ready to help whenever Victor got stuck. That wasn't often. As Victor gained skills, he gained confidence. Apart from the fact that it taught him things he wanted to learn, just playing with the desk was fun. It was like an immensely complicated video game with real rewards for winning. It was beyond his competence, or his mentor's aid, to access the kind of cosmological data he really wanted. Simple astronomy was easy enough, though. With the mentor assisting, Victor got a look at each of the stars that had accompanied their own sun through space. They had all been given names, but the names rolled off his mind. Then he looked at their own planets, one by one, and then he struck oil. With the mentor's help, Victor got a sort of travelogue of the mysterious planet of Nibu. Someone had done a flyby and deployed a robot shuttle. The shuttle didn't land, it simply skimmed through the atmosphere of Nibu, taking pictures of the great metal objects that Victor had seen from space. It seemed that its handlers had been interested in two particular areas. In one, there was a protruding edge of worn metal that Victor thought might have been what was left of Ark's lander. There was nothing else of interest nearby. The other was in very bad shape. The building seemed to have been blown up by some powerful explosion, but what that was about, too, Victor could not learn. Victor stopped for a moment listening. "Marina?" he called. He thought he heard a sound somewhere in the other room, but it wasn't repeated, and he went back to his desk. "Not too much. Sorry." "Who's the bottom?" "Your mom. She's always on the bottom." Aw. That must mean my mom is boring. Then Victor switched views. "Habitats," he commanded. And his mentor provided him with the fact that there were more than 800 of them circling Swollen Nergal. Then there were the natural moons human beings had colonized. Mary, Joseph, Mohammed, and Gautama were the important ones. Sudden thrill almost of nostalgia, so some of the religious differences of frozen New Manhome had persisted even here. Then he switched again to study the other planets once more. Nothing had changed on most of them. Ishtar was still Ishtar, Marduk. Gas giants with nothing much to recommend them. And Nini, of course, was too small and too far from the primary to be of interest to anybody. He stared briefly at the surface of Ready Nergal. Nothing much to look at but storms of superheated gases. Then turned to the planet that mattered most to him. Old, almost abandoned New Manhome. He caught his breath. New Manhome had changed again. It was reborn, all rolling seas, empty meadows, and young forests where the ice had gone, but it was not the New Manhome he had lived on. It was scarred. During the glaciation, all the planet's liquid water had been ice, covering the continents. As it melted, it formed huge meltwater lakes, blocked by ice dams. When the dams broke through, great torrents had scoured out scablands all the way to the sea. There was no trace left that Victor could find of the docks or the ocean-going ships or the town. True, in the hills near where he thought Homeport might have been, trying to translate the desk's coordinate system into his familiar navigation numbers, there was a cluster of buildings, but whether that was related to the old city, he could not say. This time he definitely heard the sound, and he could tell that it came from the kitchen. "Who's there?" he cried. He heard the freezer door close, but there was no other answer. Puzzled, Victor went to the food room. Someone was leaving through the other door, hastily, as though not wanting to be seen. Victor stood there, blinking. The bowls he had been refilled with fresh fruit. The scatter of used dishes he had left was gone. So that, he thought dazedly, was how the housework got done. But how peculiar that it was done by someone squatter and broader than himself, wearing a grizzled gray fur coat. "It wasn't a grizzled and gray fur coat! It was done by a squirrel! A genetically altered squirrel!" "Hey, the KB is reading. Hello, Arachnid." "Ooh, the KB is stretching is what he's doing right now." "See, I told you, genetically engineered slaves. That's what I'm talking about. People are like, the future is great. The future's full of slavery." "Just ask the wizards. The best system is a caste system. Lol." "It's not food time. You think it's food time because you have a terrible sense of autonomy. Come here. You can sit on the arm of my chair. There you go. There's no food, and it's not food time. Butt scratch. Butt scratch time. Happy cool. No, not on my legs. My legs are naked and you're full of claws. No. You're not getting up on my desk. That has to be one big squirrel. Was the squirrel a bit nutty? Possibly. Half an hour later, Narina came back to be greeted by his questions. "Yes, of course," she said, surprised he would ask. "Naturally, we have someone to do things like that. Who would do them otherwise?" He saw one of the gillies. Gillies, Victor repeated, and then blinked as he connected the sound of the word with the glimpses he had caught. Do you mean gorillas? They're called gillies, Victor, Narina said impatiently. I don't know the word gorilla. They're related to humans, but without much intelligence, normally. Of course, we have modified them to be somewhat brighter, and quite a lot less belligerent and strong. Even so, they can't speak. You modified them? He repeated. From genetic materials we found in the freezers, yes? Why not? Did you think I only made human beings? I didn't know what you made, he said. He sounded aggrieved, even to his own ears. He must have sounded so to Narina, because she looked at him seriously for a moment. Then she laughed. Well, she said, why don't I show you? Would you like to watch me work? Oh, the monkey man gets to see the huge thing happen. Planet of the Apes, when will people learn? Yeah, Lily, when will people learn? You're inches from the microphone and you never talk. You're sitting on the floor and you can't stop screaming at me. You're a dork. What? You want down? Down is fine, there. Have a box. Yeah, I lived here 2 months and still haven't unpacked everything. Just every time you move, you leave more and more stuff in boxes. I don't even know why people buy stuff anymore, honestly. Why buy stuff? You don't need it. Everything's digital now. Never because they blew it up. Those maniacs, they blew it up. Damn you. Damn you all to hell. Hey. That's not for your scratching. I gave you a scratch box in the living room. So don't be a dork. Narina was a creature shaper. Victor began to realize that this woman was a major VIP, a star, famous through the habitats. She was remarkable even among the small number of greatly respected people who designed living architectures. The gorilla menials had come from her labs. So had the food animals and plants, so had the gorgeous and bizarre-smelling blossoms that decorated the spaces of their lives. Although their biggest business was making babies to order, she and her assistant, Decaduck, could make almost anything. Decaduck was not pleased at Victor's visit. He insisted that Victor wear the gauzy robe over his cash sacks, and when fussily demanded, he wear a hat too. Who knows what parasites might be in that disgusting fur on his head, Decaduck demanded. He was nearly bald himself. Why, Decaduck, Narina said, laughing. Probably about the same sorts of things as in my own hair by now. Decaduck flushed furiously. Nevertheless, Victor wore the cap. When Decaduck considered Victor sufficiently sanitary, he turned away, glowering, and started his work. He used the desk keypad to set up a large picture on the wall screen. It was a 3D representation of a young woman. She looked somewhat like Narina, but her hair was coca. I don't know. Is it cocoa or coca? Because you say coca, it's like cocaine. It was colored like cocaine! Where Narina's was butter, and her eyes were closer set. Who is she? Victor asked politely, and Decaduck glared at him. You must not talk to us while we are working, he scolded. But I will answer this question for you. She was no one. She hasn't been born yet. This is only what her parents want her to look like, and so we will arrange it. Now don't ask any more questions until we are through. So Victor watched the image of the child who was not only not yet born, but not even conceived, as Narina and Decaduck matched the DNA strings that would produce that height and that color of eye, that taper of finger and that delicate arch of foot. That part of the process was not interesting for Victor to watch, simply because he could not follow what was happening. Under the holographic image was a changing display of symbols and numbers, specifications, Victor supposed, though he couldn't read them. No doubt they had to do with not only external appearances, but nerve structure and disposition, and, well, who knew what characteristics these people would want in a child. But whatever the desire was, Narina could supply it. She had no problem preparing the genetic blueprint that filled the order, and then it was only a matter of cutting and splicing and matching it. The things they did were not merely a matter of surface appearances. They weren't even mostly surface appearances. The most important thing they built into every new baby was health. There were all kinds of hereditary traits that had to be added or deleted or simply changed around a little. The effect was vast. The boys who came from Narina's laboratory would never lose their virility or develop that benign prostatic hyperplasia called old man's disease. The girls, however long they lived, would never acquire the widow's hump or osteoporosis. Bad genes were repaired on the spot. Single gene disorders were the easiest to deal with, of course. They came in three main kinds. There was a kind where a bad gene from either parent made the trouble, the recessive or homozygous gene. Blech. That word is fun. Kind were there was Let's try it again. The recessive kind were there, where, I cannot read this. What is wrong with me? It's where, like where bear. Where bear. It's the added word. He didn't need to add the Latin in there. God, he turned into flipping dumbass for a minute. What the hell is his name? Jules Verne. A lot of Latin. Here, let me list you off a name of Latin fish. Did you know that? For anybody who's never read, if you've never read, I'm going to interrupt myself for a minute, but if you've never read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, don't. Watch any one of the films and they're 10 times better than the book. And the reason why is because Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea is a thinly veiled attempt to list off how cool Latin fish names are between snippets of boringly written story. But don't get me wrong. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea is one of my favorite stories ever. Submarines and kraken and destruction and madness and nuclear explosions. Yes! All great and glorious things. But when you read the book, there are literally chapters that just list the Latin names of fish. I will not go down that road again. Sorry. There you go. The recessive kind, where there wasn't any trouble unless it came from both parents, and the X-linked recessives that affected only males. All Narina had to do with such conditions was a little repair work. If there was something wrong with the APO, B, C, and E genes, Narina made it right and reduced the risk of a future coronary. If the hypoxanthine guanine phosphoribosylph blah 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 gene. I probably could have read that word, but it's split from the page. Phosphoribosyl. Wait. Yeah, okay. This is Latin. It's getting late in the day. I'm almost done. My mouth is starting to turn into jelly. Give me a second. Phosphoribosyl transferase gene, yes, was defective. A good one was patched in with a shorter name, I hope. And the child would not have Lesch-Nyhan disease. Codon 12 of the CK-ROS gene would be supplemented with a single nucleotide, and therefore went the risk of most pancreatic carcinomas and a lot of the colorectal ones too. So Narina's handmade children were exempt from many of the ills the flesh was otherwise heir to. No child born of the laboratory would ever have Epstein-Barr, whichever way you want to pronounce that, or sickle cell anemia, familial hypercholesterolemia, thank you, that one was a fun one, Huntington's disease, hemophilia, or any other of the hereditary nasties. Their arteries shrugged cholesterol away, their digestive tracts contained no appendix, there were no tonsils in their throats. Des Latinum Peritus? No. I don't know what you said, but no. You know, there was a time in my life I wanted to learn Latin. Because I felt like learning a dead language was somehow beneficial to me. I mean, Spanish, sure, why not? But Latin, I'm an idiot. Citus relate in ise tabernet. You shush, Spoon. No one cares about your Latin. For that reason, Narina knew very little of surgery. In some ways, her grasp of medical science was centuries behind old Earth's, or even new man-homes. Dealing with Victor's freezer ulcerated leg was about as far as they could go. No one in Narina's world was competent to cut out a lung or chop a hole in a side for a colostomy bag. No one ever needed such things. Oh, they did die sooner or later, but usually later, and usually because they simply were wearing out. And almost always because they knew that death was coming and chose not to stay around for the final decay. When they had finished with the day's production, Victor paused as he slipped out of his cloak. Could you do anything you wanted to them? He asked. I mean, could you give a baby 6 toes or 2 heads? Decaduck gave him an unforgiving look. Thank you, he said, for reminding us how primitive you are. Of course we could, but we never would. Who would want it? Even Rena sighed. Sometimes you are almost too odd, Victor, she complained. Only so that you could write something other than lorem ipsum as a placeholder? Yeah. I think it would be really cool to know Latin. No way in hell I'm going to learn it, though. High Gothic? The first one should translate to learn Latin scrub, if I got it right. And the second one says looks like Latin, but it isn't in Germanish. Sorry, 7 is bothering me with texts and it's awesome. So I'm replying. Two heads are better than one. You would think so. At least you'd never be alone. But then again, you'd never be alone. When Narina at last pronounced Victor's brain as cloudless as it was likely to get, you will not remember everything, Victor, and you will seem to remember some things that never really happened, but only a little, I think. He began to think seriously about his future. The big question, of course, was what future did he have in this place? Reason told Victor that the fact that he had any future at all was a great big plus. He took some comfort from that. Anyway, he didn't need a lot of comforting, for making love to Narina was a grand aspirin for all aches of the soul. Sometimes his trick memory would throw up a sudden misplaced image, then he found himself thinking of lost Risa, with a kind of melancholy ache that nothing was ever going to heal. That didn't last, and meanwhile Narina was there. She was willing and adventurous in bed, and when they were not making love she was, well, much of the time, affectionate, kind, and friendly. Two heads. Imagine the fights where you can't get away from the idiot head. You're never alone anyways, KB. We're all in your head because you were still passed out in the forest. You need to wake up. No, I'm fine. That tingling sensation in my toes got better. I think a bear came and sat on me. I'm good. I'm warm. Maybe a bear dragged me to his cave and is going to eat me. I don't know. I'm okay, Spoon. I'll be fine. See, the fire's warm. It was true that she was simply not interested in some of the things that mattered to Victor. The mystery of what had happened to the universe, for instance. Of course, she pointed out there should be plenty of material on just about everything somewhere in the teaching files if Victor wanted to use them. He could even use her own desk, she added, when she wasn't using it herself, of course. When Victor complained that the mentor didn't seem able to turn up the really interesting stuff, Narina even took time to try to instruct him in some of the desk's refinements. The desk really was a desk, of course. At least, it looked like a kind of old-fashioned draftsman table. It was a broad, flat rectangle, tipped at an angle, with a kneeling stool before it and a kind of keypad in the lower left-hand corner. The symbols on the keys meant nothing at all to Victor, but Narina, leaning gently over his shoulder and smelling sweetly of her unusual perfume, and herself, showed him how to work the pads. "Can you read the letters, at least?" she asked. "No, well, maybe. I think so," he said, squinting. "Some of them, anyway." The written language had not changed a great deal, but it had become phonetic. The alphabet had 11 new letters. Narina rapidly scrolled down to cosmology, after getting Victor to try spelling it in the new alphabet. Nothing appeared in the screen. "This is quite strange," she said. "Perhaps we're spelling it wrong." But though they tried half a dozen different ways, the desk obstinately refused them all. Nor was it any more help with time dilation or relativist effects or even quantum mechanics. "What a pity," Narina sighed. "We must be doing something wrong." "Thanks," Victor said glumly. "Oh, don't be unhappy," she said, cajoling. Then she brightened. "There are other things you can do," she said. "Have you ever tried calling anyone? A person, I mean. I have to call Pelly, anyway. Here, let me show you how to call." "You mean like a telephone?" "What is a telephone?" "Never mind, I'll show you." She tapped the keypad, got a scroll, stopped it at the name, and tapped the name. As Victor opened his mouth, she said quickly, "This is my personal directory. There's also a general one which I will show you how to use, but I don't use the big one when I don't have to. Would you... Wait a minute. Here he is." The desk went pale and opaque. On the black space on the wall behind it, the face of a man formed pumpkin fat with a pumpkin smile. "Pelly?" Narina said. "Yes, of course, it's Narina. This is my friend, Victor. You saw him before, of course." "Of course, but he was frozen then," the pumpkin grinned. "Hello, Victor." "Hello," Victor said, since it seemed to be expected of him. Narina went right on. "Your gillies are ready," she told the man. "A couple of the donors want to go back. When will you leave?" 6 days, the man said. "How many gillies?" 22, 14 of them female. I hope I'll see you before you go." "I hope so. Nice meeting you. I mean, alive, Victor," Pelly said, and was gone. "You see how it works? You can call anyone that way. Anyone in our orbits. Anyway, it's harder when they're in space or on New Manhome. Then you have to allow for transmission time, you see." But Victor had no one to call. "What did he mean when he saw me when I was frozen?" he asked. "That's Pelly," she explained. "He pilots spaceships. He's the one who brought you and the others back from New Manhome." Then she said, remembering, "Oh, yes, he's been to Nebu, too. If you're so interested in it, you can ask him about it if we see him." "Oh my god!" talking pumpkin! It's the future, Susaki. It's fine. Talking pumpkins are the norm. Episode of Futurama where Fry gets stung by the space bee. That's one of the best episodes that I cannot watch. It just hurts too much, even if it does have a happy ending. The other episode I can't watch is the one where they found Fry's dog and had the option of regenerating it. That one destroys my heart. I love both those episodes. The dog one is easy to get around because if you watch the movie, the first of the films, or I think it's the second build. Anyway, Bender's Big Score. If you watch Bender's Big Score, it actually describes was it Sam? Was his dog? Anyway, it describes the dog's life as actually having been happy. So you can get over that episode of the dog being sad at the end, because in the film he actually gets to spend a lot of years with Fry before he gets frozen. Yeah, Jurassic Park. Any genetically modifying food would cause them to uprise. Genetically modifying anything causes it to uprise. I don't want to wake up. It's warm in here. You know, if you guys keep saying that and I wake up cold and frozen in the woods, I'm finding you and kicking your ass. That's going to be my goal. I may have frostbite all the way up to my notches. I may have to have both my legs removed, but I will wheelchair my way to your existence and kick you. You won't know why, but I will do that. Seymour, thank you. Yeah, Seymour asses. Or Seymour butts. That's right. Yeah, Seymour was the dog's name. But if you watch Bender's Big Score, Seymour actually does have a good life, so. I do love them, and I know about the story of the movie where Fry gets to go back, but that doesn't stop me from feeling like my heart's being ripped out. Arachnid, you should look up, it's a YouTube music video. Actually, wait, I'm going to do this. I'm actually going to do this for Arachnid. Really quick here. Because I'm a nice guy, and nice guys do things like this. No. Where is it? It's got to be on here. Okay, let's see. There's a music video. I'm going to find it here really quick. Do not click on that. It'll be loud. Oop. Really? Really? What do you mean I can't find it? Damn it! There's... Oh. 1 second, Stucky here. Permit. It's around here somewhere. There you go. It's like the movie Up. Great movie, wonderful story. F that movie because the first 15 minutes kills me. I just can't watch it ever again. See, I don't feel sad because in that movie they had a long and happy life together. People have had more difficult times. Okay, well, I'm going to look this up later. I'm going to finish reading for you guys because I'm almost at the next chapter and I wanted to get to the next chapter. So before we continue, before we end, I'm going to get to the next chapter for you because we're nearing the end of stream for today. But I will look that up. It's Zach Hemmesy's. It's the song Mind Heist. It's the theme song from Inception. And well, maybe wait. I gotta look it up. I have to look it up. I have a problem. I have a wasting illness. I can't not. So let's see. Well, it's not an Inception episode, it's just Inception. I believe this is the right one. Yes! Okay, Arachnid. This is from the B episode, so don't cry like a little girl. But you should watch this. It's a trailer based on the B episode using the song from the Mind Heist, Zach Hemmesy's Mind Heist from Inception. You should totally check it out because it's actually a really, really well put together trailer, as it were, for that episode. And you may still cry like a little girl, but try not to. Try to hold your water, sir. That's actually one of my favorite episodes because it's so like psychologically badass. Anyway, so we're almost to chapter 22, I think. Nearing chapter 22. Enough words. Okay, 23, excuse me. 310, so about 9 pages. With the clues Narina had given him, Victor managed to work the directory himself. The desk gave more than a phone number. It told him about Peli, space captain, resident, generally of Moon Gautama, but most of the time somewhere between the orbiting habitats and the other planets of the system. He was poring over the views of Nibu again, when Rena came back, surprised to see him still bent over the desk. "Still at it, Victor? But I'm tired. I'd like to rest now." And she glanced toward the bed. "There are a lot of things I still want to know, Narina," he said obstinately. "About Peli, for instance. Why is he so fat?" "So he can get around on New Manhome, of course," Narina explained. "He has to have supplements to build up his muscles." "Steroids?" Victor guessed. Narina looked pleased. "Well, something like that, yes. And calcium binders so his bones won't break too easily, and all sorts of other things. You've seen how Decaduck looks. And he's only been to New Manhome a few times, collecting specimens." She looked embarrassed. "Bringing back people for me, I mean. Like me? Well, yes, of course, like you. Anyway, Peli goes there all the time. It makes him look gross, of course, which is why I would never... Oh, Victor, I didn't mean it that way. After all, you were born like that." He let that pass. And did Peli really land on Nibu? "You mean in person? Certainly not. No one has done that for many years. But people have landed there?" Narina sighed. "Yes, certainly, several times. But not anymore." "Victor," she said sensibly, "of course not. What would be the point? There's air, but it's foul, the heat is awful, and the gravity crushes you to walk there. Victor, well, not you, no, but any normal person, it's much stronger than on a moon. It's almost as bad as New Manhome, but at least New Manhome has a decent climate." "But Narina, there may be people on Nibu. Some of my own friends landed there." "Yes, and never came back, I know, you told me," Marina said. Isn't that a good enough reason to stay away?" "But somebody made those machines. Not humans, no." "There's no one there. We've looked. Just the old machines." "And have the machines been investigated scientifically?" She frowned. "I don't know what you mean by scientifically. Some people were interested in them, yes. They even brought some small things back to study. I remember Peli had a piece of metal that he showed me once." Victor inhaled sharply. "Can I see the things? Are they in a museum?" Even that trailer made me tear up. Oh dear God, Arachnid. "Well, I thought it was cool anyway." "'Cause it kind of fits." "You killed Fry." But Narina only laughed when he tried to explain what a museum was like, from his fading memories of the Los Angeles Art Museum and the La Brea tar pits. "Keep all those dirty things around, but why, Victor? No one should keep trash. We'd just be choking on our own old worn-out things." "No, I'm sure they were studied at the time. No doubt there are assay reports and probably pictures of them somewhere. You can use the desk to see what they look like. And I think a few people like Peli might have a few little bits for curios, but we certainly don't have a place where we keep such things, and besides," she looked suddenly harsh, almost as though both frightened and angry. "Besides," she finished, "those hideous metal things are dangerous. That's why no one lands there anymore. But people got killed there." And then reluctantly, she went to the desk and showed him what had happened. More than a century before, a ship landing on Nibu. People coming out of it, grotesque in metallized film suits to keep out the heat and helmets to give them air to breathe. They approached one of the mauve pyramids, half buried in the shifting sands of Nibu. They were trying to drill a way in, and then it exploded. Of the pyramid itself, nothing at all was left. It simply was vaporized. No more of the people. A few fragments of nearby objects, blasted in the explosion, littered the sands. When he looked up, he saw Narina had averted her eyes. "Turn it off," she ordered. "Those people were killed." He surrendered. She came closer, smiling down at him. "That's better," she said softly, leaning against his shoulder. He didn't resist. He didn't encourage her either. "All right, Narina, I see what happened, but it doesn't tell me anything. What are those machines?" "But no one knows that, Victor," she said patiently, "and it isn't very interesting." "It is to me. I want to know what they what they were for, who built them, how they work. All this what stuff is very interesting, of course. But can't I ever find out a why?" "Why what, Victor?" she asked kindly, stroking his stubbly cheek. "Wouldn't you like to grow a beard? Most men do if they can." "No, I don't want to grow a beard. Please don't change the subject. I mean, I want to know why things happen. The theoretical explanation behind the things I see." "I don't think those words mean anything," she said, frowning. "I understand theory, of course. That is the background of genetics, the rules that tell us what to expect when, for instance, we strip a certain nucleotide out of a gene and patch in another. Yes, exactly. That's what I mean. What I'm looking for is something on astronomical theory." Narina shook her head. "I've never heard of any astronomical theories, Victor." "What is it with Victor? He had brain damage and he was fine. He was fine. He was dumb and happy and fine. She fixes his brain and now he's pissing in his own bed again." Hi, I know you're all about genetics and you don't understand anything about science, but I'm going to drill science into your head until you listen to me. And it's like, no, shut up, Victor. Keep having sex. Eat food. Be happy. Shut up. And Victor's like, I want to learn about science. And he's like, oh, dear God. You were smarter when you were more dumb. And it's as simple as that. Okay, I was going to finish this chat. Well, I can push it a little bit, I think. Victor don't know a good thing when he has it. He doesn't. He's an idiot. When Victor came home from a ramble, Narina was waiting for him. I have something to show you, she said mysteriously, pleased with herself. Come into my room. There, she surprised him. She opened a compartment in the wall. It revealed itself as a little cage with something moving beyond the wire mesh. Narina reached into it and drew out something tiny and soft. It moved comfortably in her hands. Tell me, Victor, she said, hesitating as though worried at what his answer might be. Have you ever seen one of these things before? Of course I have. He let her give him the furry little thing. It's a kitten. Exactly, she said triumphantly, observing as he stroked its fur. Does it enjoy that? She inquired. Most cats do. Where did you get it? I thought they were extinct. She looked gratified. Indeed they were, she said, graciously acknowledging the remarkable nature of her feat. I made it. There were some frozen specimens of feline sperm Pelly found when he brought you back. Experimentally, she stroked the kitten as Victor had done. Victor could hear nothing, but the nerve endings of his hands informed him that the creature's silent, tiny purr. It's always a worry, she said, when you don't have any female genetic material for a new species. Oh, it's easy enough to structure an artificial ovum, but when the animal is something you've never seen before, you have to wonder if you've got it exactly right. Victor stroked the soft, wriggling little thing and handed it back to her. I said it looks like the rightest little kitten I've ever seen, he pronounced. Are you the rightest little kitten I've ever seen, Lily? Exactly. It's a kitten. Was wondering what it was going to be. She's always showing her his kitten. Her kitten. She accepted the compliment gracefully. I'm going to give it to a little boy I know. Carefully she returned it to its cage, closing the door. Victor shook his head, marveling. I knew you designed children. I knew you created intelligent gorillas. Gillies, Victor. Intelligent gillies for servants. I didn't know you could make just about anything you could imagine. She considered that for a moment. Oh, not anything, she decided. Some things are physically impossible, or anyway, I could make them, but they wouldn't survive. But this is the most interesting part of my work, Victor. That's why anyone bothers to go to New Manhome, really. There's a whole biota in those freezers on New Manhome, you know. We don't know half of what's there. Even when there's a label, we can't always be sure of what's inside, because they got pretty sloppy about keeping records for a while. So when I have a chance, I match up sperm and ova, when I can, or find some related genetic material that I can tinker into being cross-fertile, like this. Do you sell them, like a pet store? I don't know what a pet store is, and I certainly don't sell them any more than I sell the babies. If someone wants them, I get credit for my time. She sighed. It doesn't always work. Sometimes I can't find a match or even make one. A lot of the specimens are spoiled, and it's terribly hard to reconstitute them. And then even when we do get an interesting neonate, we can't always feed them, especially the invertebrates. Some of them are really specialized in diet. They just won't eat what we try to give them, so they die. She grinned. Babies are a lot easier. It was probably true, Victor reflected, since the real human fetuses never appeared in Narina's laboratory as born babies. Gestation and birthing weren't her problem. What she produced was a neat little plastic box, thermally opaque so it didn't need either warming or cooling for 48 hours or so, containing a fertilized ovum and enough nutrient fluid to keep it alive until the proud parents could put it in their own incubator. Don't you ever want to see the real babies? Victor asked her curiously. What for? Narina asked, surprised at the question. Babies are very messy creatures, Victor. Oh, I like to hear how they turn out, and I'm always glad to get pictures of them. Every artist wants to see how his work turns out. But the only ones I ever wanted to be around for more than a day were my own. Then she was surprised again at the expression on his face. Didn't you know? I had 2 children. One of them was just a favor to her father, so I didn't keep her very long. He wanted something to remember me by, you see. Her name's Akhlain, and let's see, she must be 14 or 15 by now. She's on Moon Yosef, and she comes to visit me sometimes. She's a pretty little girl. Very bright, of course. I think she looks a lot like me. I didn't know, Victor said, hastily revising his internal image of Narina. He had thought of her as many things, but never as a mother. Not even as one of those mothers of the present newfangled variety who picked out specifications for their offspring and never went through the uncouth bother of pregnancy. Then he remembered her words. You said you had 2 children. What about the other one? She laughed. But you know him very well, Victor. Who did you think Deccaduck was? You're banging his mom! Of course he's mad! I just walk up to Duck and be like, I'm banging your mom. Have a good day, bud. Darling, you know I love you, and you are amazing in your intelligence, but what you have there is called a skunk. Good times. The next time Victor saw Duck, he looked at the man with new interests. Duck did, Victor decided, more or less resemble Narina. But then all these people resembled each other to his eyes, and in the same way that all Westerners look alike to most Chinese. I like how he didn't go the other way. What Duck didn't look like at all was anyone young enough to be a child of Narina's. There was an answer to that, too, Victor realized. He had no idea at all of Narina's age. She could have been a youthful, good-looking 40, New Man-Home years, of course. She could equally have been a very well-preserved 100 or more. None of these people ever looked old. In bed, she was definitely ageless. Ew!
Watching you.
Who hasn't pinged his mom? Actually, that is a good question. And I don't know the answer. Victor took much pleasure in that part of their intimacy. Still, there were times when he felt a kind of submerged resentment that his main reason for living was to provide a little sexual excitement for a woman he hardly knew. There were even times when he remembered that he had once had a wife. Then, sometimes, a gloom descended over him that was like the suffocating withdrawal of all air, like all the light in the world going out at once. But there were other times that were not gloomy at all. Narina was a splendid aspirin for all those passing aches of the soul. That's the second time he's used that exact sentence. Apart from all her other virtues, Narina was deeply fascinated with Victor's body. It wasn't just sex she wanted from him. She wanted to prod and squeeze and feel his archaic flesh. Though, of course, she often wanted sex, too. She could be happy for half an hour at a time as they lay naked together, experiencing the flexing of his muscles. Not just his biceps, but his forearms, his thighs, his neck, all the muscles he could flex at all, while she held her hand on them to feel them swell. And they're natural, Victor, truly. Grunting, of course they're natural. Only please, Narina, don't squeeze so hard on my sore leg. Oh, of course. And then a moment later, and this hair here, did everyone have it in your time? Victor had always been ticklish in the armpits, and of course the ticklishness led to tickling back, which led to other things. Or she would minutely inspect the brownish spots on the back of its hand, touching them gently in case they were painful. What are they, Victor? She asked, stretching behind her to reach for something he could not see. We call them freckles, he grinned. Although, well, many of those are little more than just freckles. People get them when they get older. They're what we call age spots, then. They're perfectly natural. Hey, ouch! But she had been too quick for him, jabbing the back of his hand with a sharp little metal probe she had pulled from nowhere. Don't make such a fuss, she ordered, carefully putting her cell sample away. Here, let me kiss it. Because kisses make things better! It's scientifically proven. And then, after a little study in her laboratory, she told him they were simply degenerated collagen. I could clear those spots up for you if you wanted me to, Victor, she offered. He reached out to touch her body, not naked this time, but with only the flimsy gauze and the cash sex to modify it. She turned comfortably beside him, taking her ease on a fluff of airy pillows beside him. Her skin was quite flawless. Do they offend you? He asked. Of course not. Your body does not offend me. Then why don't we just leave them alone? And Riley, Victor reflected that this was a strange relationship in which she was almost entirely absorbed in his body while he was desperate for everything that was in her mind. Yeah, it seems about legit. Her body she let him have almost any time he chose. Usually she chose first, in fact. Her mind was another matter. Victor didn't feel that Narina closed him out or went out of her way to keep information from him. It was simply that so many of the things she wanted to know bored her. Yes, Victor, she would sigh while she was thumping excitedly on the desk screens. I see what you're showing me. There used to be more stars. Excuse me, I suddenly got burps. Many more, he would answer, scowling at the impoverished sky below him. But she would yawn and perhaps put her hand in a place that made him pay attention to other things again. What was thrillingly, even frighteningly strange to Victor was only the natural order of things to Narina. It was as if someone from Tahiti had seen snow for the first time. The Eskimos wouldn't have understood his feelings. When Narina came back from her lab and found Victor absorbed over the desk, she was tolerant about it, usually. She stripped off her robe and sat behind him. She could certainly feel bare body touching bare body, but it did not keep him from concentrating on the desk instead of the touch of flesh. It's nice that you have an interest, Narina observed philosophically. He tried again. Narina, I'm certain that some very strange things have happened. Don't you want to know about them? Don't you ever wonder? It's not my line of work, Victor, she said, looking slightly ruffled. He said in bafflement, the universe has died around us. We've been kidnapped. Time stopped for us. She was yawning. Yes, I know. The other savages. Sorry, Victor. The other people from the freezer talked about that sometimes too. They call it God the Transporter or some such thing. A silly superstition. As if there were some supernatural being who moves stars around just for fun. Then what is the explanation? It doesn't need an explanation. It just is, she shrugged. It just isn't a very interesting subject, Victor. No one really cares except... Oh, wait a minute, she said, suddenly sitting up and looking pleased. I almost forgot Frit. Victor blinked up at her. What's a Frit? He asked. Frit isn't a what, he's a who. Frit and Forta. I designed their son for them. They're old friends of mine. Matter of fact, it's Belit. That's their boy, who I made that kitten for. He'll be 20 soon, and it's time for his coming-of-age presents. She thought for a moment, then nodded. Yes, I'm sure Frit knows all about that sort of thing. He'd be interested in you, probably. And he and Forta have been together nearly 30 years now, and we still keep in touch. Victor sat up straight. He had the tingling electrical feeling that all at once, without his having anticipated it at all, a goal for his life had been given to him. How can I reach this Frit? He demanded. She looked doubtful. Well, he's very busy. But I suppose you could call him up, she said, then suddenly brightened. I know, she cried. Why don't you go to Balit's party? Balit's party? Balit's Frit's son. They live on Moon Mary. No, wait a minute, she corrected herself. They do live on Mary, but I think they told me they're having the party on Frit's family's habitat. She nodded to herself as the details of her inspiration were coming clear to her. Duck can handle things here for a couple of days. It would be a nice trip for you, and I ought to take Pelly's gillies there anyway. That's where his ship is. And I'm sure they'd be glad to have us, and then you can talk to Frit all you want. She gave Victor's thigh a decisive pat, pleased with her idea. We'll do it. And don't ask me any more questions now, Victor. Just believe me. It'll be fun. Never trust anyone who uses the sentence, it'll be fun, to tell you to do anything. Oh no, put your finger in that socket. It'll be fun. Fun for whom? Because it ain't going to be fun for me. But that is the end of chapter 20, number 22. We're on chapter 23, and I have to go. Like, again, woo. Sorry about that. I have to go again. It's early, I know, but it's Saturday, and I have to donate. And I'm donating at 2:05, and so that gives me, well, it's 23, so I got a little bit of time to take a shower and do a thing. Let's go to the dentist. It'll be fun. Yeah, exactly. You tell your cat or your dog, hey, let's go to the vet. It'll be fun.
Night, death, darkness, not being there, is an essential component of being.
Good times.
You don't have the one without the other, just as your buzzsaw has
Anyway.
without having that.
Anyway, who? Donating the plasmas? Yes, today is my $50 day. I will have 303 Darus on my card after today. I won't know what to do with it all. But that's a lot of dollars to have. Just to have as mine. Those are my dollars. Oh, a little bit of a story before I go today. But before I go, let me go ahead and let you guys know that today's music is brought to you by YouTube, actually, of all places. You can find the songs that we're currently listening to at the link I just posted in chat. Along with that, you can skip the time frame on that. It'll just get you right in the middle. Anyway, along with that, if you like what you saw today, please feel free to follow if you haven't followed already. Well, heard today, excuse me. If you have followed and would like to see more of what I do, you can follow over on YouTube at youtube.com/4kbshort. You can find over 1,000 Let's Play videos for your viewing pleasure. You can also follow on Twitter and or Facebook for news and updates. Along with that, we have a Discord channel. If you want to hang out at our Discord channel, you can hang out there and chat between streams. I also note when I go live in those streams, as do a few other streamers, so you guys can see multiple streamers hanging out there. On top of that, ladies and gentlemen, I think the other thing is if you'd like to help support the channel, we have many ways of supporting the channel. Viewing is always the best way to support, but if you'd like to support in other ways, there are some monetary options. The best option, of course, being our Patreon, where for as little as $1 per month, you can help keep us alive and happy and with food in our holes. I'm hoping to find a new job soon, but I'm never quite certain if that's going to work, so we're doing our best. But no, I was going to tell you guys a little bit of a story before I go. So you guys should give all the love and hearts to Seven, because she had her surgery, and because of her surgery, she wasn't allowed to donate plasma, and she's been donating plasma along with me, and we've both been getting basic spending money from donating. Well, her donation limitation was going to be up in the middle of September, so she had less than a month. or just about a month before she could donate again, which she was really excited about. And she was at work yesterday, and she had a donor who was, for lack of better terms, being a pain. And she had to disconnect the donor, pull the needle, and then she was going to stick her other arm. And for whatever reason, she had pulled everything apart. She did everything she was supposed to. She pulled everything apart, and she had her face mask down. But when she popped the top off the blood cover, basically the tube that had all the blood in it, in order to attach it to the new needle, it sprayed blood everywhere. Which it happens. It happened before. It's happened over time. She sprayed blood on her coat, on her face mask, everywhere. She checked herself. She checked. She had other people check her. No blood on her skin. It was all on everything else. And then apparently after she got all cleaned up, she looked at her face and she had 2 tiny blood droplets on her chin. And because she now has a blood exposure, she can't donate for an entire year. So she cannot donate plasma for an entire year, and she's very upset because she was so super excited about being able to donate to get some spending money. And so she's kind of really upset about that. So hopefully you guys can show Sev some love and give her some hugs when you see her again. Hopefully she'll be around on Sunday to hang out with us. But anyway, not to be kind of a wuss about it. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and run. I do have to go take a shower, get ready to go do my thing. I was going to eat, but I pushed the stream a little bit, but that happens. As for you guys, I'm going to go ahead and throw you at somebody. I don't really see anybody playing anything fun. I see a whole lot of garbage being played. No offense to the people who make the games, but it's stuff that I wouldn't really want to watch, so I don't think you guys would really want to watch it. And that's just my opinion, but like 7 people are playing Path of Exile, which means it got an update. And Path of Exile is basically D&D, but a free-to-play version. Or not D&D, but Diablo, but like a free multiplayer version that's not really multiplayer. And then there's a lot of different random streamers playing a lot of different random games that are just whatever. So I'm gonna go ahead and throw you guys at Panda. Red Panda playing Factorio. It's always a good game to go back to because Red's pretty good at it, and he's a lot of fun to watch. So we'll have to figure that out. Again, as for me, I'm going to meander. You guys try to have yourselves a good day. Try to stay safe out there in the world. I will be at work tonight. I will be streaming tomorrow. Don't know what. Maybe something creative. I've been trying to work on a game recently, so I'm hoping to work on that. So you guys, again, enjoy yourselves. Chillax. Stay safe. Don't die. And thanks all for hanging out, and I hope to see you guys tomorrow. I'm going to go ahead and kill the tunes, and then I'm going to wander off. So I think I pressed this one, right? There it is.